Welcome, esports fans. Here at Last Free Nation, we spent years giving you the BDE Awards, spending our time focusing on the worst player at the League of Legends World Championship. Well, in 2022, we are here to also celebrate the great plays from this year's Worlds in the form of our glorious Big Dick Energy Trophy. A pinnacle of craftsmanship, we have selected the eggplant to be the base, truly the most girthy and masculine of the vegetables, crowned with a golden blaze of DBZ hair, representing energy flowing from within that allows a player to explode to the next level. Finally, golden lightning bolts surging through the eggplant, infusing it with virile strength to make the most extraordinary plays that you have ever seen. We finish this process by polishing the award with the sweat of Faker, taken from his mouse mere moments after his victorious 1v1 versus Ryu in the Zed vs. Zed. Truly the biggest dick play in League of Legends history. Last Free Nation and Esports Bet will be bestowing these awards for the biggest dick energy plays of the World Championship weekly on Summoning Insight. Not only that, but you may have a chance to win one as well. Send us your biggest parlays, wagers, crazy odds that you have been successful with on esportsbet.io. Message them to the mods, they'll send them to us, and we may bestow one on you as well.
Right, we're here for another episode of Summoning Insight. A little bit of a different setup, obviously, because Monty's on the couch set up there. We're going to be joined by our guest later, so he's there with Monty. Spoiler, you should already know he's already in the building and has been for the last few days with all the streams. So we'll get to that in a second. Obviously, this show, like all of our shows, is brought to you by Esports Bet. And currently, they have all the usual offers on. They have the first-time deposit bonus, 50% up to 200 USDT. They have the bet forgiveness one, which is also a first-time bonus, where if you bet with crypto up to 100 USDT and you lose, they will give you it back. Spoiler, that would have been brilliant for loads of these quarterfinals. Like, obviously, some of them were pretty crazy, could have gone either way. In fact, there even were some underdog wins. In fact, I think off the top of my head, I think the RX was actually an underdog against EDG and obviously came through on that one. So if you'd have bet on that one, you would have either just won straight up. And if you'd have lost, like say you'd done the DAMWON, this is the analogy I'm using here. If you'd done the DAMWON bet, you'd have thought, oh no, I almost, wait a minute, I could get the 100 back though. So go to the Discord to use that one, discord.gg/esportsbet, message the mod mill and say Thorin, Monty, or Last Free Nation sent you any of those three, and they'll basically give you the bonus. Right, so obviously we just played the little video there, Monty, announcing that, like, here's the thing, you know, in the past when we said the BDE Award, it was like sort of a spiritual title, wasn't it? It was a concept that we awarded to people. Now obviously everyone knows this story, so we won't go too deep into it. Because it was such a great idea, everyone in League of Legends has a rec machine, and they just take what we did, and even though they tell us we're irrelevant idiots, we didn't invent it, they can't just go, well, I thought of my own very similar idea. They have to go, it's literally that anyone can give out BDE Awards, and so they started doing it, and then famously, I don't know why they ever cried about this on Twitter, but the people who do Gamepedia just honoured that and actually fucking listed all the like fake BDE Awards on their website, and was saying mad stuff like, well, there is a precedent in the community. It's like, you, what are you talking about, you moron? By that logic, I'm starting a new show called State of the League. You have to list it on Travis Gafford's page, and it's every episode, just whatever the fuck I want. Episode 1, why Gamepedia sucks dick. Oh, you go and list it then, homie. So anyway, point is, we give out the BDE Awards, except now we literally give out the BDE Awards. So similar to the BDE Award, we've got another one, which is that video explained there, which is the one you're holding up now, Monty, but it's quite far from the camera to it. There we go. So basically, what is the premise of this one?
All right, so thanks to Esports Bet, we are giving out Big Dick Energy trophies to the players with the Big Dick Energy plays throughout Worlds. And I will literally mail these trophies to them. And not only that, but you, the fans, can win some of these as well. As I said in the video, if you guys are making like crazy bets or like Big Dick Energy bets, whether you got some insane odds or crazy parlays or you were live, like perhaps some people I know were like live predicting T1 to win that game 2 at like 7-1 when it looked really dangerous for them versus RNG. If you guys have some of these, join the Esports Bet Discord and send it to the mods, and we'll be featuring some of those, and we might send you one of these as well. But they're obviously extremely high quality. We did a great job making them, so thanks to Esports Bet. So these are fun awards that we are actually going to give out at Worlds this year. It's great. We'll get Wolf and Yamato's opinion about who should get one this week. My personal take is probably Zeka, considering he had some insanely big dick plays. But also there was Pioshik with the insane Soul Steal, which was, I mean, that might be the biggest dick play of all. We'll get into that as we analyze the quarterfinals.
That thing is, by the way, the guy who absolutely, hands down, would win this if just something had gone if a smite had gone 50 pixels to the right, Canyon would be winning this award right now. But sadly, we'll get into it later. Alas, he smited Thorin or whatever the fuck, didn't he? Like, so we all know how that one went. So yeah, okay. So we haven't awarded any of these yet, though. We're still figuring it out, right?
Yeah, we're going to figure out the first one that we give away today on the show. And, you know, we can give away multiple of these in 1 week if we have some, like, really, a few.
Is there a cap on how many people can win them?
Plays. We've got 4 to give away to players. 4 to give away to players. We've got a couple to give away.
We'll be discerning then. We won't just blow them all before the final in case someone has the best match ever.
Yeah.
We'll be discerning.
So, really fun. Thanks a lot. I hope you guys enjoy this. We're really trying to do cool stuff for Worlds this year. And as a segue, we're also, of course, doing the watch parties at my house on this couch, if you haven't seen it. We've got crazy, like, green screen tech. It's been Wolf and Do here the entire time. And this bridges in beautifully to the next topic of conversation before we get Wolf and Yamato on, which is now there are no more LCK casters at Worlds, so there's no people remaining who have seen all of the LCK games who are going to be on the semifinals, in spite of the fact that there are 3 out of 4 teams are Korean. Not only that, but there aren't going to be any LPL casters either now that DAGDA's going away, so none of the teams that are remaining have any casters from their regions who are going to have the level of expertise you would believe should be necessary. And that means you should probably watch my co-stream because you'll actually have LCK experts, to tell you about the games. I would think that would be valuable. But it's just another, like, incredibly baffling decision by Riot. And they do this every year, right? It's like, sometimes you get people who are experts on the finals. And this is not to shit talk the other casters, guys. And I'm not trying to start a war on the other casters. There are many people with great knowledge about the game who will be broadcasting these games. The point is, guys, is that you need at least one person on the desk who can explain things that these people might not know. They might not know the storylines. They might not have watched DRX versus Hanwha Life, a best of 3 when a weird pick came out of DRX, and they will be unable to tell that story because they don't know and they haven't watched every single game. They're not intimately familiar with these teams. They're not the ones who have interactions with the players or personal anecdotes about how, players might have reacted, or interviews that were held with these players that might have happened post-match. And so the thing is that there is no excuse, guys. There is no excuse. If you argue that they pre-planned this, well, why would you pre-plan when LCK and LPL are overwhelmingly likely to make the deep playoff runs to have nobody representing those regions there? It's patently absurd. It's just so fucking egregious. And they do that. They've done this multiple times. And I can tell you from my own time of being a caster, very good casters will make mistakes about characterizing the players, characterizing the teams, because they simply don't have the knowledge. And you shouldn't expect them to have that knowledge, right?
I've got a few points on this, by the way.
Yeah, it's not their region. So all of the excuses you could give, well, Riot had to tell the casters, they had to plan this in advance. Well, why wouldn't you plan it with the casters from the most powerful regions that are most likely to make it deep? Why would you have to pre-plan this potentially at all? Because there is no additional cost to using these casters, right? Everybody's in hotels right now because they're all on the road. This year, they're not doing it where everybody's in one location and those people live in Berlin or they live in Los Angeles where they're not paying for hotels. Almost everyone who's a caster these days is on day rates, so it's the same cost, right? And they could have just created a fluid situation where you have, you could say, well, we're gonna make decisions as teams advance to make sure that we have the best possible product. Clearly, they didn't do that. Or they could have just said, we need one analyst guaranteed throughout the entirety of Worlds, just there on the desk at minimum, and they didn't do that either. The whole thing is just completely broken.
Where I would start is the same. One thing that bores me to fucking death in esports is people don't need to actually have a good reason or a principle. They just have to be told by someone else a reason. So you see the difference there. They don't have to have a good reason. They just have to hear a reason. So if they hear Monty, like the old refrain, but the other ones are all freelancers like Monty and Papa Smithy, but the other Riot casters work for Riot. Therefore, they have to do it. Like, well, why? Why would they have to if they're not as good? If they don't know the same regions, if they don't have the knowledge? Why would that be necessary? What you mean is you just let Riot, a game that has made literally billions on billions on billions off a free-to-play game, they're just allowed to skimp on their World Championship, which they themselves try and big up as some shit that one day will rival the fucking Super Bowl that has billions watching it. They're the ones bigging that up and saying, oh, 10 years, this will be like the NFL. They're the ones who said all that, guys. So why the fuck would they get to skimp on who they hire and not hire the best people? And then also, I'll just throw this in there. Why is this still a thing? Why do I have to watch the bozo? I don't give a fuck, Monty. They're not my mates. Why do I have to watch some of the bozos? Some of them are good. Some of them are bozos who just watch LCS all year, or the LEC ones that spend half their time using fucking mummery, to use Game of Thrones stuff, like clowns making silly skits. That's the main thing they're famous for right now, not in cutting insightful analysis. There are the rare examples, the cage rolls, the Vediuses, etc. But aside from that, it's about entertainment. It's about WWE in the West. Why, when you get to the point of the tournament that has the least of that? I always say this, people don't understand in my career as a CSGO analyst, I wasn't making wild jokes on the semi-final of a major. That's when it's for all the brass tacks. That's when you come in and everyone's an analyst and you're just watching the games. And there's another thing I want to say. So first of all, there is no freelance angle. Like, the logic now is, Riot has actually chosen everyone except like what Freak at this point in time over anyone who's from the LPL and LCK. They're actually telling those people, by the way, you are inferior by definition by the choices I am making right now. So I want Riot to be held to that. If this world isn't that great in the semis and the final, there you go, you know to blame. And then secondly, the other angle as well is, in the modern day where there is no issue and it's all just freelance like this, there has to at least be a compromise. Like, here's the compromise I would suggest, Monty. Take whoever you are at Riot, take your fucking two favorite people, send one of them to the LCK, send one of them to the LPL, and then every Worlds we can solve this problem. Yep. By the way, some of them are even good enough. Some of the names I mentioned right now would kill it on the LCK if they went there. They don't even have to go for the whole year. Send them for the summer split. That'll be enough. Because there's the other thing to say. They're all going to say the same thing because every caster is prideful. They have an ego. They don't want to be diminished. They're all going to say this. It's what Jack used to say back in the day. They're going to go, but you can't know. I watch the LCK and I have watched the VODs. Yeah, you watched them, homie. You watched them eating some fucking crisps and some noodles with your coffee and then you surfing Reddit, right? You didn't cast them though. When you cast them, you prepare for them in a very specific way. Like Monty said, you watch the VODs, you take your notes, you compare them as the game goes. And I can tell you, when you work desks, it imprints those games and memories in your mind in a way that watching a VOD will never do. I know myself, by the way, the merges I was at, I could tell you every big moment, mate. The ones I just watched on Twitch, I missed some of those. I forget little details too. I'm known to have a good, it's just imprints in your brain a different way. And also, like Monty says, think about this. If you're watching some DRX Handball Life game, which by the way would not be a marquee match if you don't know, like in that scenario, you're not putting that in some like filing cabinet. You're just going like, oh, whatever, what's going on here? Oh, crazy. You're not even going to remember that in the same way. Whereas the guy who did the game, that's going to be the one thing that stands out from that match. When he now thinks of DRX in a draft, he's going to go, there was that one time. You're not going to have that. That guy isn't going to be there to say that on the desk.
And not only that, guys, but there isn't even a viewership angle to take here. Because guess what? LCK English has more viewership than LCS this year. Look it the fuck up. They have more viewership. So they're not like, it's mind-boggling because LCS is now a less watched product by hours viewed. LCK is actually more popular among English-speaking fans. That's just true. So if your argument is like recognition of casters for the global audience, you're also losing that argument. Like LCS is now the least viewed region outside of LPL by English-speaking casters. So
yeah, I never thought that was ever possible.
I don't even know what argument exists anymore.
Think about how badly they've run the LCS too, that's even true. That is mental. If people don't know that, in Monty's day, that would be inconceivable.
We never had viewership that rivaled the LCS when I was there. It was much more popular. So you could make that argument at that time. But the other thing is, like, Riot doesn't think that casters affect viewership because of their actions. Like, we can tell this because of their actions and the way that they treat casters. So if casters don't, if it doesn't matter which casters you have in there, let's have the ones who are most qualified to cast that region's teams there to create the better product. I mean, the answer to all of this is just cronyism, guys. That's what it is. It's proximity to Riot HQ that gets you these jobs, not merit, and not having applicable experience. And this is the most player-focused company in the world that clearly does not have the players or their viewers in mind when making these decisions.
I'll also throw this out there as well. The other reason why it's not as simple as like, but I did my research for 2 weeks before Worlds. It is logistically impossible for you to have watched those best of threes, even on quad speed. And even then, I don't know what world you're in. Do you take LSD or something, have time dilation and be viewing each thing like in the moment, like fucking Quicksilver in that X-Men movie? Get the fuck out. And then it's already logistically you couldn't have. And then here's the worst part of all. The worst part of all is something that's going to be so subtle and missed by all fans as to why this is a big deal. But I hate it with a passion. Here's what I hate, Monty. All the other casters from the LCK and the LPL are so fucking cool and just care about their region being represented properly and the best info getting out there and Western fans knowing who the good players are. I can tell you right now, they will be sending loads of insight and scouting reports to these casters. Well, here's my question. Why would you need to? If it was the other way around, if Dagda was there, would fucking Aziel be sending him a little scouting report of things he's noticed about you? No, he wouldn't. You wouldn't fucking need him. So my problem is, even though, yes, I understand those guys are fucking legends, that will make the semis and the final better, that they send that info in. But they shouldn't have to. The very fact that they do that, by the way, implies they should be the guy doing the fucking game. Because I'm sorry, we're not at the level anymore like we were a long time ago. Here's the other thing I'd say. Beyond people like Monty, a lot of the people back in the day who did the LCK, they were people who didn't have as much experience on broadcast, and they were people who were specialists who started to build their skills. Even LS wasn't that good if you go back and watch Sport TV. He was average as fuck when he started. He wasn't the same LS now. He hadn't built the skills. So back then, you might just want that guy sending in the info. The difference is back then, someone like a Rivington, a Freak, they were mega tenured on camera. They did have the chops. So you can even make the argument back then you would want that guy feeding it in. That's not even the case anymore, guys. You go and look how many hours people like Dagda have been on camera now. They've also done all the talk shows, you know. It's like these guys are just fucking tenured. I also think, as a final thing to say, why do you have to be so miserly that they fucking go home? They go home and watch it from Twitch like the rest of us. You can't even make it like TI, where they just get to chill out in some like fucking executive suite at the arena and watch the games and feel celebrated and feel like, oh, I'm part of something. Oh, even though I didn't get the semis, cool. And then I'll throw this one last thing in there. Now that it's freelance world, here's the obvious solution. Right, I'll never do it because, as you say, it's cronyism. It's all about how much you fucking lick the ring, innit? Right, in this scenario, here's what they should logically do. You start the worlds and you tell everyone there, look, beyond a few names who are very tenured figures that we're always going to use, the rest of the spots are available. It's up to everyone to compete for them. And I'll tell you what, you will bring the best out of these guys. And if some guy is like a first or second time guy, but he has an amazing worlds, why would you honour that guy's ticket and turn? Well, on your bike, mate? No, you'd want that guy to be like the breakout sensation on the desk and go to the final, wouldn't you? Wouldn't that be the perfect story?
And Dagda were very good on the desk at Worlds. Like, I think they more than earned the ability to be on the desk for the games that are coming up, which are going to be all LPL or LCK. And by the way, guys, it's not expensive to solve this problem. If Riot wanted to solve this problem, they could solve it immediately. If you combine the costs of their rates, because remember, there's only 3 days left, so you're paying 3 days of rates plus some travel days and maybe some content days plus hotel and food. I would estimate you would probably pay about $10,000 to $15,000 extra to keep these guys around for all of the food, all of the lodging, all of the rates, all of the costs, everything. So we're talking just to keep one LCK guy around, it would be 10 to 15K, most likely. And they could do that. They could make that decision right fucking now. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. Just make the decision. It's not that hard. It's not expensive for you. It's ridiculous that you would even create this situation in the first place, but it is also not too late to fix it. You can do it. You can do it.
Also, I'll just throw this out there. I feel like for Worlds, one thing they've got to figure out, dude, because I've just noticed this year, and this year is the year it aged the worst, in my opinion. Right? In the past years, it was fine when the LCS casters would do the NA-EU rivalry and the shit talk and all that. Dude, this time, I'm not joking. As far as I can tell, this is how it went. Week 1, it's all hopium for NA, and like, oh, they could be really good. By the way, that ages really badly when I see the same guy in the semi-finals telling me that, of course, these were the teams that were going to make it here. These are far and away the best, and they're much better than all the Western regions. To see the same guy is insane, contrasting whiplash. And then secondly, the whole angle, as far as I can tell, was like week 1, like that, and then it was like week 2 was like, lol, I hope EU fails. Like, what? What is that angle? That can't be the angle from Western casters. I'm sorry, you don't get to go to Worlds. Here's what we do then. Here's how that can be fair. When LCS goes out, you go out the tournament. There you go. That's your deal I'll make for you. If you want to take that angle, then you fuck off when the LCS does, and that's what you put all your chips on. Because, mate, these people were actually acting like EU did nothing in week 1. Like, all EU did is, no, they beat, like, the best teams in the tournament. You do know, like, T1's in the semi-finals now. Like, DRX is in the fucking semi-finals now. These were teams that were beaten by Western teams, and you couldn't even do the whole Western thing because it had to be NA versus EU until the fucking NA goes out. So, in general, I think the whole fucking, the theme, the fucking vibe of Worlds is it's so off considering the games and the meta are actually fire. It's actually a banger Worlds thus far.
Yeah, and like, unfortunately, the viewership is down because of time zones, and this is why it's good actually that Worlds doesn't happen in North America once more than every 4 or 5 years. In fact, I don't know if Worlds will ever happen in North America again, guys. That's like actually a real concern. When viewership of the group stage is down 40% because it's such a bad time for Asia and Europe, I just don't know a reason why you would have it in NA. The NA viewership, as we know from LCS, is way, way down, and you're not really activating well in this region. We've also seen at the arena in New York that almost all the fans are fucking LCK or LPL fans anyway.
Yeah, it's true. There's loads of them, isn't there? Yeah.
So why even have it any events in NA? Is it like a very, very real question? I don't think we should. As much as it's awesome for me to have Worlds in this time zone, just from a business perspective, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to ever do an NA event again. Like, I anticipate probably, just given the cycle of Worlds, that Worlds will probably be in Korea next year because it hasn't been for a while, and I think that makes the most sense. So you're back in an Asian time zone. But in 4 or 5 years, when it comes time for, or it might be in China again, who knows, right? When it comes time to have an NA Worlds, I just wouldn't make that decision. I just wouldn't make that decision. But yeah, a lot of this stuff, I think has, the location, the broadcast times, very unfortunate, leading to lower viewership. And then also these casting decisions are just very not good for the majority of the fan base of League of Legends, whether it's English speaking or not.
By the way, I'll make a quick contrast for people who don't get it, because people, again, who come from Riot and League of Legends games are going to think this is just par for the course. Like, well, it's Riot's gear and they are American and they made the game. That's irrelevant, right? Valve Software technically made CSGO. They actually hired a third party, people called Third Path Entertainment, but whatever. They own the IP. It's their game. They bought it from Gooseman like fucking 20 something years ago, right? It's their game, and they're an American company. They're from Seattle, if people don't know, right? You're all probably thinking, same thing then, Thorin in NA. Nope. They've had 3 majors in NA ever. This is only about to be the 4th in the Americas in general. I think this is something, Monty, like the 19th major or the 18th major or something. The majority were in Europe. That was the main region of the game. Even the NA player would tell you, I want to go to Europe and play. Like, that's the place to have it. So the dumb thing about this to me as well is, I actually think they actually handicapped the fucking Western teams by having it in NA. Because you heard those stories about how all of them were just getting fucked by the scrim scenario where the Asian teams were just scrimming with each other or didn't go to NA early, or you went to NA and you had the whole issue where people were getting nails, they couldn't scrim. I saw that one that Fnatic said, dude, that was met. Like, by the way, that's how G'd up Fnatic and YamatoCannon are. They almost got out of that fucking group despite all these problems. He was saying in that story there, dude, they had something like 3 days where their main practice partner just cancelled to go and do media obligations. DRX was 1 day, RNG was another day, a 3rd day someone just got ill. Like, you can't, what's the point in having Worlds if like the teams aren't in good form? You have to at least give them a chance, whereas we all know it is 100% squared away. If it's in China or Korea, everyone's going to get their practice. Everyone's going to get the best practice, best internet. There's no possible problems, essentially. So to me, me, it's just logical in the modern day. The majority of them should be in that time zone, in one of those two places. Look, if you want to get cute with it, yeah, have like some group stage in Vietnam or something, or go to some of these countries to give like the flair and do all that jazz. But aside from, if you had some very, very good reason, I don't really see at this point what the point of having it in America is. Like, I'll give you a reason that would be a great one. Here's when you do it in America. When you do get fucking Cowboy Stadium, or you do get some enormous fucking venue, and you know I can pack this one, then that would be a good reason to do it. That's probably the area where the West in America especially is ahead of everyone. The stadiums are super new. They're all billion-dollar investments. Like, they have the best box. That's when it would be a really clever idea to do it. But for me, I don't think that this one lives up to it. Like, basically what we're talking about here is a lot of things that were taken for granted in the past don't really apply now, and they can change. I know people always get that mixed up as well. They think it's like turning a fucking steamboat. It isn't. You can change tomorrow. If you think the reason's good, change now. Don't make the same mistake again.
Yeah, I mean, I think we may see some different formats as well, and we'll talk about the leaked European format once we get Wolf and Yamato on, because that's going to be a very interesting discussion to have theoretically, right, with those guys. But it also implies that there are going to be changes to the international circuit as well because of the 3-split system. Because everybody's like, where does MSI go? And I'm like, well, obviously this probably implies that there's going to be an additional international tournament or some other kind of break in competition, which is good. And I think Riot a lot of these changes. But I agree with you. I don't think there's really a reason to have it outside of Asia at this point in time if you are trying to maximize the viewership of international competitions. And, the Asian time zones often are not terrible for Europe either. So it makes logical sense that you would have it in one of those two places. And especially because you can have a significantly larger live audience. I'd be interested to see how the VOD viewership of Worlds is doing, because we may have seen for those languages, we may have seen a massive increase in VOD viewership that they can count towards their numbers. I think it's just better off in those regions, and especially it's better off for the teams, like you said. They get better practice. When Worlds is in NA and EU, the Asian teams just won't leave until the last second because they'll all practice against each other. Like, it'll be the Taiwanese, Vietnamese, Chinese, and Korean teams all practicing together, and they won't want to leave because they have a better practice environment and they can stay at home. And it's much better for Worlds parity if the Western teams can go boot camp in Korea beforehand. They get better practice themselves. They get more acclimated to a meta. You see the meta evolve more evenly because all the teams are playing each other, and they're able to get their skills up to par, individually and as a team through solo queue and through these scrims. So I think it's just better all around.
And obviously, it's only a minor detail, but there was that whole thing where even Champions Queue, like Dominella said, absolutely did have people who were in Diamond 3 and absolutely did have people who were one-tricks. Like, look, you can have a one-trick on the Korean Challenger ladder, but it'll be a fucking amazing one-trick. He won't just be some guy, it's the only one he plays this, but no, like, there'll be some amazing... Again, just the quality of everything will increase, except maybe, like I said, the stadium. That's the one angle I can think of. Is there anything else before we go into... Oh, by the way, as an aside, the way I knew there was a change to some of the formats coming down the pike, Monty, it was obvious to me. Marsh went on LS's stream and speculated that he would do... Give me a break, mate. I can see the fucking hand up there working him like, This guy's never had an original idea in his mind. His original idea literally was buy SKT and then go... It's hard. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Like, this guy has no original ideas. Come on.
I mean, you mean buy SKT with Comcast's money? I mean, it's like...
Oh, he's another one of those guys I love. My favorite people in esports. People don't know. I have gotten in so much trouble with owners over the years because they all act right to the people who don't know how money's generated. Like, they're the fucking gods coming down from high, from Olympus. Like, I have brought you the gift of money to make esports. And what I always tell them is like, oh, no, you didn't bring your money. What you did is you tricked a guy to give you some money, and now you're pretending that's your money. Like, let me know when you generate some money, brother. I'd love to see that one day. I'd love to see you make some money from those fans you tell me are brilliant. I'd love to see you actually make a profit at some point and run a business with a legend. Not just go, I've got some moron who've got an unlimited faucet just powering money in. And basically, until he figures out I'm just never going to get anything out of it. I can just keep bringing more money and lose loads of money. And then they go, ha, ha, I'm a genius, losing loads of someone else's money. Ha, ha. No one's ever done it like me. It's like, you're the most mediocre fucking businessman of all time. Because I've always said this, in the same way as like the Nikola Nioms of the world in CSGO, I've never worried about these guys because they are the used car salesmen. I'm waiting, I've always said this, until people like the Mark Cubans of the world come in. Then we'll be playing with fucking real money, guys. Then we'll actually see what businesses stand and which ones fall and which ones make sense. Because so right now, you guys don't know, esports isn't mainstream enough yet that the big dogs actually come in. We've still got like our guys who think they're the fucking demigods, but they're just all right. They're just people who can come in. They can basically just put on a suit and do a good business proposal and say the right words in like business language and get the money initially. And spoiler, the money that will come in 10 years will dwarf this. They will look like absolute peons. So that's the day that I'm waiting for. So yeah, anyway, it does seem based on that, like both LCS and LEC will change and they'll change up the circuit and something has to change. Like, let's be real. That's the thing about Riot is they are idiots and stubborn, but eventually they're going to have to make changes because at this point in time, this is what people always forget. It isn't Riot anymore. It's Tencent, isn't it? And Tencent aren't just going to sit back while you just let the whole thing just go down in fucking flames. They're going to eventually basically come whip someone and they have to get it sorted out.
Also, Riot has been sucking the venture capital out of these teams in terms of the, the buy-ins to their leagues and the payments as well. And then the players have been sucking it out in the form of, vastly exaggerated salaries. And as we likely head into a recession, and whether we head into a recession or not, guys, I can tell you right now, it's hard to raise a late-stage venture capital at the moment because we might be heading into a recession. It's hard to get sponsorships right now, because we might be heading into a recession. And so the money's got to come from somewhere at some point in time. And LCS is not sustainable on its current level of viewership. And they need to figure out other forms of monetization, which, by the way, here's a prediction for you. Welcome to gambling sponsors to the LCS. We've finally figured out, guys, it's okay now because you see it in traditional sports all across America right now. So they're going to suddenly change their mind about their restricted sponsorship categories. That'll probably be the first one because they actually need that money to sustain the LCS and sustain the teams now. So I imagine that'll be the first domino to fall in terms of what happened with the LCS this next year. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Riot just says, nah, we don't want that money, but we're going to find an alternative revenue generation system for the teams. But the teams got to make more money now, guys. Esports is, the bubble is bursting. The bubble is bursting as we talk. And you're going to see a lot of teams consolidate, merge, go out of business, start to sell their slots. A bunch of the LCS teams are already trying to sell their slots. Some, like FlyQuest, succeeded. Some will not succeed in this endeavor. But so many rumors about what's going on in terms of the business side right now. And so many owners have said to me, we need to change the way this scene is run. They need to either get a piece of the skin pie, the digital revenue pie. There needs to be media rights sold to somebody who is going to take them. Or you're going to have to open up to, different sponsors, right?
I even think that's one of the craziest things about how Riot mismatch. By the way, fun prediction. I made it myself many, many years ago, but I'll make it again. The decade or so where Riot just ran it and said stupid things publicly, it doesn't need to make money. Huh? It's just fine as it is. Like, we are doing you a favor by giving you esports, right? That decade will go down so fucking poorly in the history of esports. When you look, as I've always said, at the opportunities they pissed away. Like the idea they had, think about the insane viewership they had relative to anything else in esports about 5-6 years ago, Monty, for League of Legends, for Worlds, for LCS. The idea they weren't charging like a premium for Twitch for broadcast is mental. Like the idea they were just like, it's cool, we get the platform for free and then they get what are you talking about? Like any other, that's why I say there aren't real businessmen in esports yet. There's just like people who are like, should be at the middle level in the real world and they get to be the kings of business and pretend they are Mark Cuban. Someone like that, by the way, the joke is by now, he'd have probably made like esports profitable just from broadcast rights, just from these details. Like this is what now would have scaled because the joke now is as the numbers go down for these, you can't go back now. You can't go back with less viewership and go, I'm going to have to drive a harder bargain this time, more than zero. They're not going to give you it. They're going to go, you know what? You've actually waited so long that I got no rivals now as Twitch. So I'm just going to say, I'll fuck you. Would you still like to be on Twitch? Or do you want to disappear entirely and have no viewership? Like, they have no cards left to play, dude.
you may not like Overwatch League and you may not like Bobby Kotick, but that guy got $100 million out of Twitch. That's all I'm saying. We'll give Overwatch League and Bobby Kotick the big dick energy play for the $100 million Twitch deal.
And
for
you know,
esports.
people say, yeah, but he just got that because he had like connections in Twitch. Why doesn't Riot? I just said they basically half built the bloody platform with League of Legends. If you don't know, that was even the original battleground for owned and fucking Twitch back in the day when they were locking horns, seeing who was going to be the dominant apex predator. So the idea that they don't have the in with Twitch is like, what are you talking about, my dude? Like, you fucking blown it. If it took you this long, you still don't have it.
Yep. And you know how Kotick did that too was that because MLG had MLG TV and they put the Overwatch League preseason on MLG TV and didn't release the viewership numbers. Twitch was actually incredibly scared that Activision Blizzard was creating a rival streaming service that would remove all of their games from the Twitch platform. So they panicked and just paid $100 million for Owl media rights. Was it a terrible deal for Twitch? Why, yes, it was. Was it great for esports? Why, yes, it was.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's how you business, guys. That's how you business. Anyway, let's take a quick break, and we'll bring Yamato and Wolf on. As usual, this first segment has been sponsored by Esports Bet. Really appreciate it. We've got these great awards that we'll be giving out. Reminder, guys, there's lots of stuff you can do on the Discord, and there's still time to get in if you guys want to win one of these things. You could do it with DJT, their proprietary currency. You could just play for free and win real money or win some cool Big Dick Energy awards for yourself. And you can go to their Discord at discord.gg/esportsbet, message the mods in the mod mail with your account info. They'll give you 50,000 DJT, and you can play through Worlds, you can play through the Counter-Strike Major, you can play through TI that's going on right now, through Blast towards the end of the year in Counter-Strike, every other esports game imaginable, and you'll already be there to send in your fun tickets when you guys make the crazy parlays or wacky predictions with the good odds so we can mail you one of these. So anyway, that's it, guys. We'll be back in just a few minutes with Yamato and Wolf.
Okay, we're back. We've got two guests now, two for the price of one. We've got Wolf, because you have to understand, Wolf is one of the premier analysts of the LCK. Hence, he's on Monty's couch, not at Worlds. So that goes without saying. You know, that doesn't even need any explanation. Just hear the last half an hour of the usual Monty and Thorin explain why Riot is a shit house. But then someone who definitely can't call Riot a shit house is YamatoCannon, because A, he works for Fnatic, B, well, he hopes he still works for Fnatic, B, he's obviously he wants to remain around the LEC. Hopefully he does. And then C, I mean, he's just at Worlds, wasn't he? So he has to like the tournament and think it was all good. One thing I want to ask you, yeah, go on.
I'm here if Yamato goes back to LCK, man. Maybe he doesn't want to stay around the LEC. He can go for another Korean coaching excursion. That would be very, very fun.
I don't know about that. Listen, Monty, I think he's already had enough of like lunatic fans trying to end his career. So he's already dealing with Fnatic fans, homie. He doesn't want trucks at this point. There wasn't even a truck meta when he was there. Like, all I'm saying is that I think he's sown his wild oats in the LCK. And now, okay, so let's get into this, because Yamato, one thing that was very interesting was you do your series on YouTube from the days from before you got this coaching gig again, when you had the downtime, called The Voice of Yamato, where you address a bunch of different topics. And so one thing, if people don't know, this is where I know fans, it's not that like info can't get to fans. They're just really lazy now. Like, they would rather someone summarize his content. If someone doesn't tell them what's in something, they're not going to go and listen to it. So if you don't know, spoiler, I've been listening to these for months and months. So I have had loads of little gems that I could just weave in about where the draft goes like this. Like, it's all in there. He actually gives away loads of the info. And by the way, Yamato's also one of those coaches where when like playoffs is done, he'll just tell you a bunch of shit that they were doing in the playoffs. Like, he doesn't hold the info, it's all secret, because he knows the meta's changed, the patch has changed. It's actually safe to give it out there. So if you ever want to know for real what he was thinking or what was going on behind the scenes in the team, you'll often find out in these videos. So he did one most recently after the team got eliminated, and someone made a Reddit thread where they summarized a lot of the key points, and it gets into basically, you'd be amazed how much info there's. So one area I thought we should start and just discuss generally, because it seems like this was a problem with either where Worlds was held or what the decisions of the Asian teams were for practice. But one thing I noticed that was a big problem for your team, people will know that you arrived, and some people got sick and that delayed practice, and some people were going on different time schedules of when they arrived. But it sounds like a big issue for you, twofold, was one, there was the fact that like some of the top Asian teams just didn't go to NA basically, and so you were limited to who you could scrim against. And then two, there was also the fact Schröder, that you had like some mad thing you were saying where on different days you'd main like LPL or LCK practice team would just go and do media obligations instead of scrimming. So you can give us some thoughts, like what were the challenges of trying to practice for this tournament and trying to actually be at your top shape?
So, like, first, initially, our team, we struggled with practice the whole year. So, anything that kind of made that situation worse for us would be just an additional challenge because we had this issue, like in spring split, Perks was talking about how shit we were in scrims, which was very true, right? And practice was something that we kind of ebbed and flow in terms of how much we achieved out of practice. And on some days, it would just be a complete drag in terms of what we would achieve and so forth. So, this would be the most like the underlying issue for us. First and foremost, it's like we ended the LEC very late, like in comparison to last year when we played the finals against Mad Lions. We had, I believe we finished 29th of August and play-ins started 5th of October. And we didn't even play play-ins back then, so we had a month and a half to prepare. In contrast to this time around, the finals was 11th September and we played play-ins 29th. And we, of course, were a part of the finals. We lost to Rogue, but we were there and we traveled and we played the lower bracket. So obviously for us, we need to rest. Like in my mind, for us, I'm thinking the tournament, the World Championship is going to be very long. We need to rest. And I'm not going to just jump into practice and scrim against TCL because all the other EU teams are taking that break too. And then when we headed back, we had sponsor obligations. I get that, you know, the days that I booked scrims with the fellow European teams, we couldn't, we just had to cancel those because we needed to fulfill those obligations. And that's the time where we got hit with COVID as well. So 2 players got COVID, we traveled over to the event. And in my mind, at this point in time, we only had 4 scrim days to prepare for the World Championship. We looked at the patch, it was quite light, you know, some changes to Graves here and there. We tried to figure out and prepare as much as possible we could through 2v2s, maybe 1v1s, solo queue practice. There's other ways to prepare than scrims, right? So we tried to utilize that as much as possible. But on the day we arrived, DRX basically didn't have access to their computers because we had to wait when we arrived to pretty much get our PCR test. Otherwise, we wouldn't have access to the practice rooms. Okay?
Got it.
It's safe. DRX didn't receive their PCR test, so 1 whole day of scrims, which is completely gone. And then the second day, which is the second day out of the 4 days of scrims that we had, the second day, we scrimmed with Code JJ back then because Rux didn't know that he had to fly in and that Hilly was sick too. So we scrimmed this day with Code JJ. But it turned out the team that we practiced again, they had like, they canceled because they had a family like tragedy going on and they had to cancel, they couldn't play. So it was just bad luck. And on the third day, we were supposed to scrim DRX. They had a media day, so the half of the day was gone. We only scrimmed 3 games. And then the same thing on the 4th day, when we practiced against RNG, they had a media day. And these media days are basically like the content that you see on broadcast, the snippets and the, you know, the cool shots when they're in New York, you know, whatever, in Mexico City on a mountain or some shit. Like this is what they kidnap the players for 7 hours and they have to take these pictures. So we were completely getting like smashed in terms of what our preparation and practice was. So we tried to piece it together, like with, you know, it was a fucking workshop, you know, it's like piecing together with whatever we did during the LEC playoffs and so forth. And then we played our games back-to-back ones, and we tried to scrim as much as possible on the days that we played. We played rather early, but the issue was as well that the other teams, most of the other teams that were in play-ins, were also, of course, practicing, like playing, and they couldn't play against us. So we could maybe squeeze in 2 games on the occasional day when we were playing against potentially like DRX and RNG. And then scrimming against some of the North American teams was kind of counterintuitive because at the same time, we knew if we qualified through groups, we would play against C9. We had we could potentially play against EG and so forth, and things in terms of what ping we could have scrimming against some of the NA teams. It wouldn't make a lot of sense, and also they were fully booked anyway. So this was the challenge. And then finally, you know, after we played, this is a long story. So I'm just giving you all
right, keep going.
full context of why the practice was so fucking difficult. And we eventually, when we qualified, we took 1 break day, we scrimmed the next day, and then we had to fly out already. The day we arrived, everyone, like we flew from like 5 a.m. and then we arrived maybe at 6 p.m. I'm not gonna put my players through like a scrim regiment at that point. You know, whoever has energy plays Champions Queue, whatever. And then on the next day, I get told on the same day, all right, you have to do media. You have to wake up at 8 to do PCR tests, and then we have media till 6. So once again, I know my guys. If they're gonna be told that they have to scrim after waking up at 8 a.m. and they had media up until 6, I'm going to just burn them out completely. And then the day after that, that was the first initial day of us playing against C9. So our schedule was monstrous, and I can't even begin to imagine how it would be in a case where we didn't auto qualify with first slot, because in a case where you have to play the best of 5 in play-ins on the last day, you basically fly to New York in the night. Basically the same flight that we took at 5 a.m. Like at 5 a.m. you have to fly in the night, go to the tournament, and then there is no potential of any break or anything at all for you to recover.
Yeah, there was only a few days because I think the last play-in best of 5, like you're saying, was on a Monday, and groups started on Thursday. So yeah, that turnaround was extremely tight. And also, just to go back to your original point about EU or LEC playoffs, there was an additional. They gave like a week off, or was it a week or 2 weeks after regular season where there just weren't matches? Well, LCS had playoffs starting, so they actually intentionally skipped a week there, I believe, in order, which then pushed everything back even further.
If I remember correctly, in summer, what happened was in the middle of the split, we got just a week off for no. I don't know what the reason was. I think Riot wanted to break in Europe or something like this.
Riot, I can tell
I'm
you
not
the
sure.
reason. So there were 2 weeks, but again, it was after regular season and before playoffs started. There was a week with no games. They could have started playoffs a week earlier, I'm pretty sure. And then the other thing, like you're saying, so what Riot does is the entire company gets a week off in July now, unless you're Korean or Chinese, by the way. Those leagues kept running. Well, we're still on those broadcasts, but they stop LEC and LCS for those weeks, which then again pushes the schedule back even further, right?
Yeah.
So
No, that
what's
part was just cruel. Like the part that, like the timing of everything, it was very like smushed together, and it wasn't just a challenge that we faced. It's like I can't imagine RNG playing a best of 5 and then flying the next day, and then they had
Yeah.
media day. Like a lot of teams was facing this. I'm not saying sharing this to make some kind of excuses for our performance. Like it stands for what it is.
No, it was something everybody was suffering from for
It's
sure.
also really
Yeah.
hard to get practice in those 2 weeks you have between the LEC finals and flying and getting ready for play-ins, because teams that are in the LEC who are eliminated, who are not going to Worlds, have very little reason to actually spend time playing and practicing as a 5-man unit, because all of these teams are getting blown up and changed anyways. So there's not really much incentive for teams to be like, yeah, season's over. I don't know if you guys are all going to sign with me next year, but you're going to get in this 5-man group and we're going to scrim against a team that beat you and is now going to Worlds while you're not. It's really hard to get practice. The same thing, of course, true in Korea and in the LCS, where getting scrims can be very difficult. You have to scrim with teams that are willing to stay together and actually practice with you. So you might be wondering, like, why didn't he get that much practice before play-ins? It's like, well, you're not going to get quality practice during this time. It happens in every esport. When you're eliminated and the World Championship happens, every team goes on vacation.
Yeah,
So-
By the way, yeah, go on.
Were you
So-
just practicing with like Rogue and the other European teams that had qualified, like G2?
So basically, 3 days or maybe 4 days before we had to fly out, that's when the European team started scrimming. Because of course G2 and Rogue have less incentive to do so. We potentially could have pushed Mad Lions to start earlier, and we could have potentially scrimmed against TCL, but those are the teams that we have access to in Europe. Everyone else took a break, and by the time where all the European teams started to gather, the 20th, around that date, we just had media obligations, and I was insistent on making sure that my players get a break, because we did the whole lower bracket run, and we were playing like 2 best of 5s in close proximity, and it was very ongoing and very fierce, the schedule for us.
By the way, just as an aside, I thought I'd let you know, Monty, a very interesting detail that was revealed in Yamato's voice of YamatoCannon. This might actually blow your mind. I know you're not familiar with this concept because, just like all the people in Twitch chat, you're just a player, aren't you? You've never known any pro players or coaches. But you know how in the LEC playoffs, Yamato here is an idiot. He doesn't even know that the automatic way to win in League of Legends is you just first ban Yuumi every single series, no matter what. So it turns out, are you ready? This guy's so fucking shit at coaching, Monty, that he left it up against teams where if he'd banned it, they just got Lucian Nami and destroyed his team. And then another team didn't even play Yuumi. It turns out he left it up for them too. The guy's never going to learn. Oh, by the way, he won all these series. He won all these series with a team that, by the way, was a failed fucking team at one point. Remember, they almost didn't make the fucking playoffs by one game. So, like, the joke in there is Yamato. Like, look, we don't have to go into the whole playoff draft, but this is the part that unfortunately fans never see. Like, I've actually been trying to address it on these shows. Where what I do now is, instead of just doing the obvious, like, it's obvious you should ban that, I always just say something like, if there's a really weird pick that comes out that isn't played in any region, or you leave up a power pick, I just trust that teams are trying to win. They are playing scrims. They must know, like, either you have to leave it up for some draft reason, or that's something that, like, the classic example would be, I don't know if you saw earlier, but like fucking Inspired locked in like a Nidalee, which isn't really like an Inspired champion. That tells me he probably just had like 3 scrims that week where it just went perfect and he just accelerated the game, smashed them all, and they thought this is a really good. They didn't think like just play a Nidalee for no reason. So give me a little bit of thought on this, because I know you must be. It must be what's tough, right? Is that you know what happened in the scrims and you know what you're preparing for and what you're good at, but the fan just looks at sort of what's called the global meta and just thinks you have to ban that champion, right?
Yeah, on our end, we were facing teams that on paper look very strong, of course, T1 and EDG. On our end, we had to go off of the limited information that we had, and we needed to kind of recreate the thunder that we had in the LEC playoffs. We tried to recreate those matchups that we played very often and those matchups that we are the most knowledgeable around, because when you begin to ban certain champions, the meta evolves and it branches out, and you might be facing directions that might be a lot more difficult for you. We knew that running into both EDG and T1, we were a team that relied on making sure that our bot lane was stronger in a lot of cases, and playing into Yuumi Sivir is something that invites just that. In our first initial game, when we left Yuumi open, we played against of course, EDG, we had this whole plan around the invade, and they played like they smacked us on the head. Like, it was confusing for us because Yuumi, like, Victor burned Flash level 1, and we thought that they wouldn't defend, and then they defended well. They commit Gragas to the situation. They kind of mind gamed the shit out of us because Gragas was trading with our Ornn at minute 1 at topside, and then he just sprinted down, and we felt safe in some degrees that Gragas wouldn't commit, but then they ended up doing so, and we kind of lost the game, or the game was very difficult from minute 1. But our idea was, we knew if enemy goes Yuumi, they're going to go Sivir, and we can just make sure that we have champions that are very strong into Sivir. We were very early on the Azir hype train. We had 3 games of Azir in the first initial week. Azir is a champion that trades very well into Sivir, and we could easily plan towards something that we knew would be coming. So we had the plan about the level 1. We thought that we're going to create a lot of variance here in the best of ones against EDG, and if it works, it is something that every team will have to consider against us for the future of the tournament. If we manage to pull off the level 1 invade, and we get to split the map, and we get to dive the Yuumi bot, something that she's very weak at, we're going to actually have a great show of force coming into the rest of the tournament. So this was our idea of it. We're going to take Azir away from Scout. He's going to take a weaker champion. We will have Poppy and the Kalista, and we will play it out in a way where we're going to look to dive. They fucked us level 1. We had a competitive game, but there was a lot of thought behind this idea, right? Against T1, I think the moment they banned Azir, we should have contemplated a different idea. We were very happy to go in the direction of making sure that they pick the Yuumi and the Sivir 1, 2, 3 to try to put them in a case where their mid lane and their top lane champs are going to be weaker. We had a lot of success with the Akali into the Sylas, even in the game that we played, but they managed to pick up a lot of kills in bottom side that puts Yuumi in a position where she snowballs the game just a bit too easy. And it's very easy to say after a game like that to say, oh, we should have banned Yuumi and then we would have won, but there are so many things at play. They outplayed us in the TV3 on bottom side. They managed to snowball with the Sivir Yuumi, which on paper, if you play better or equal to the enemy team, shouldn't be possible. And we made mistakes, we got punished for it, and that's the nature of best of ones. And that's the reasoning behind why we chose to leave Yuumi open in 2 different scenarios. I think the Azir ban should have pushed us maybe towards banning the Yuumi, but our idea was to deny some of the better champions that synergize with it, and then put ourselves in a position where we would have the Akali, and we were also still in the mindset that Maokai was something that was doing super good, but as the tournament evolved, you can see that Maokai is definitely one of the weaker champs in the game.
Shout out to Odoamne for baiting everyone with that one pick against fucking DRX or whatever it was. He just baited the whole Western region. He thought the champion was OP. Come on, Wolf, what
act like he just forgot that Yumi was strong or something. Like, I can't believe they just didn't ban it when, if you watch the games, you can see they clearly had a plan. They intentionally left it open because they knew it would be picked, and they had the counter strategy prepared.
Yes.
And even if you results-based analyze it and go, well, they lost to Yumi, like you might think, well, they should have banned Yumi in the first place, but clearly they had an entire plan prepared in advance, and I wish fans would actually realize these things, and it's good to hear it from you and actually like see that you had this plan and you explain it. And I hope fans can actually see that, because it does drive me insane when people just say, just ban the champ, that's the answer.
Well, it's also
By the way, as a quick, go on, Monty.
we saw this come back in the quarterfinals too, in the Gen.G versus DAMWON games, where up until that point, basically when Yumi was left open, it was effectively only paired with Sivir by good teams, and it wasn't until DAMWON is trying to like pick Lucian Nami, and they're trying to make these punishes, and they don't really realize that, oh, maybe they're going to take the MF here with the Yumi, because even though MF and Yumi don't have insane synergy, if you want to use MF ult well in the late game, if you can bully the laning phase enough, then you can actually you can achieve advantages that will make the games very winnable. So there are going to be adjustments to the meta, and like Yamato was saying as well, Maokai is still a very strong champion, but when people just realize that if you're going to pick Maokai, you basically have to ban Sylas or pick Sylas yourself, otherwise you're just going to get owned by Sylas taking, like, basically being the better Maokai ult. It's you're gonna have issues in those scenarios, and now that's why we've seen a deprioritization of Maokai over the course of this event, and also because the other kind of meta shift that happened was that it came into Worlds being a three-way flex pick. Now it is only a jungler because it has so many bad matchups in top lane, including into other tanks like Ornn, that it becomes hard to play.
By the way, I've got a quick aside. I realized I've only ever really done this rant in CSGO because it's related to map pool, not really in League of Legends. So I'll just do a brief one. That'll take like a minute, basically. Right? I used to myself, so I'll offer an olive branch to the plebs out there. When I myself knew extremely little about League of Legends, was coming from other games, I used to say all the same things you all do, which is like, how can a professional mid laner only be really good on 3 champions? He is paid to be good at this game. And here's what I always missed, because it's something that happens in my native CSGO all the time. People get like a team in the top 10 in the world, and they're like, how are they only good on 4 maps out of 7? Why don't they practice them? There's 2 concepts you have to understand here that are key, which is there's no such thing as I'm good at something, so I stop practicing it. The only reason you remain really good at something is you keep practicing it. Steph Curry doesn't go, I'm not going to practice threes anymore, I'm wicked at them. He practices more than anyone else in the world to make sure he's the absolute best. So first of all, most of your practice time has to be keeping your strengths strong and sharp. So that takes most of your practice. So every bit of practice time you want to take away to practice a weakness, which is great to round out your pool, etc., that's going to be a negotiation with your strength. So the problem is, people know this. If you go into too many weird flex picks, you lose your strengths, then your biggest comps, etc. So here's the point. There's point 1. There's not unlimited practice time, and there's logistics. But point 2 is the key one I want Western fans to understand, because when I phrase it like this, it should immediately make sense. It's not that they can't play the champions, you idiot. They would murk all of you in solo queue. They would wreck the LEC with it. They can't play that champion against Viper and fucking Mako. They can't play that champion against fucking Deft, against all these bit Ruler. They can't play against the absolute best player in the whole world. Do you see the premise? Obviously, they could just pick the champion. The joke is, Yamato himself was doing this to LEC teams. You think Mickey X can't play Yumi? Of course he can, but can he play it in an LEC game where they haven't planned for that to be their comp and he has to pick it because it's available, but should he pick it? Shouldn't he? That's what you're doing there. They can all play the champions, but the point is, it's not that you can play it. You have to be able, in this scenario, think about Viper and fucking Mako. You have to be able to play it against essentially like a top 3 bot lane in the entire world. Like, there's a different, we're talking about different scales here, guys. They can play it. They just can't beat someone who's the best on it. What do you think of this?
Playing what you're best at instead of playing what you're not best at. Just imagine. Imagine having tendencies. Imagine having streaks and weaknesses.
Yeah, like we were very happy to play Lucian Nami. That was like our bread and butter. Like, I think it was Upset's best performing champion. If we could set up cases where we could get Lucian Nami Azir, that was like the Fnatic recipe of the year. If we could get this, we would put our hands on it, and it would create some sense of consistency and alignment with what we've practiced and things that we've done super well at. So in my mind,
guess what? You use Lucian Nami to take a game off of T1, which might be a finalist team at this point in time, right? I mean, I think you guys in that game got, you got the Azir for Humanoid, which he was magnificent on. I mean, Humanoid, I think, very underrated as a player throughout Worlds. He was, he was one of the best performing mid laners we've had, period, at Worlds, I think. And you got Razork on Poppy, which he was great on throughout the LEC playoffs. And then, of course, you got the Lucian Nami as well. So they gave you actually a lot of your strengths, which in my mind is probably a mistake on T1 when it comes to coaching. I think they really underestimated you. They even played cocky in that game because that invade that they had where, they basically like took away the red buff and then Owner just sprinted it down into your bot lane for no apparent reason. He's like, what if I pushed this further, right? And then it blew up the entire game after that. And you guys were very good at converting the lead that you got into the win. Like, it was a very legit win. And we haven't seen T1
You only win against
that.
T1 this tournament.
Yeah. Actually, that's actually
no one else has
true.
won a game. Yeah.
So far.
There you go.
Super legit win in many ways.
Listen, by MMA math, Fnatic beat T1. RNG couldn't beat T1. Ergo, Fnatic could have won MSI. They just didn't attend.
Okay. Yeah. Yamato, I also need the answer to this question. What the fuck happened to Humanoid at the start of LEC playoffs where he was good again? What happened? Like, what was going on in Summer Split where he was kind of ropey, and then now, as soon as LEC playoff hits, as soon as Worlds hits, he's just incredibly good again.
I think he's been. I think often he's what we have been challenged with is trying to find the right champions that cover our weaknesses as a team and also basically make our strengths really, really shine through. I think Azir is one of those champions that's very complete in the sense that he feels comfortable to just play for himself and to gain individual leads and then make sure that he farms the side waves and get to the point where he can dominate the game on his own. In Spring Split, a champion like that for us was LeBlanc. And I think throughout the year we experimented with playing the Talia ourselves, and that didn't really work out. We were playing some Vex, and this was something that didn't work as well as we saw in scrims. And it was always kind of an exploration that his performance, like any other player within the team, is very correlated with what's going on within the team. And from an inside perspective, what I was seeing in scrims and looking and really reviewing the details of his play, I always felt like this guy was really, really fucking good. I didn't really feel at any point like, yo, Humanoid, you're just playing bad right now. What the fuck is going on? Sure, there was that occasional game where he just died level 3 when it didn't need to, here and there. But I think that this created a very easy narrative to go to in terms of how Humanoid is as a player. And of course I'm biased because I'm working with so much more information, so I always view them in the light where this guy is really fucking good. But I do have to agree with the notion that when it came to the World Championship, he was completely in his element. Like he found the discipline to practice more than anybody. He was always there grinding the games on the same champions over and over again. He was doing it on repeat. Silas, Akali, Victor, Azir, LeBlanc, and just kept chopping away at these 5 champs, and the practice just showed in itself. I think in play-ins what he did to those mid laners was borderline illegal. I think even in groups, what he did in lane phase against most of the guys that he played against was also insanity. And I think it just him finding the right comfort for him in context with the weaknesses that we had as a team, maybe connecting around mid and securing mid and finding ways where we played around Herald. This is something that we definitely struggle with. And he found himself in those champions, and they just correlated very well with the meta that is currently ongoing.
I'm curious, from the group stage and from the teams you scrimmed, as well as obviously the swirling scrim rumors that happen among all the teams that are present for the World Championships. Have you been surprised by any of the results so far? Like, is there a team underperforming based on scrims or based on the practice or the rumors, or is there a team that's been really overperforming in your mind?
So we practice very little against teams besides
Sure, I get
RNG
that.
and DRX. Like we only played against RNG and DRX, and we played 2v2s against Gen.G's bot lane. this is like the practice that we managed to find. And we played one day against Seafood, what's it, Flying Oysters, fucking Seafood, CFO. Fucking CFO. So beyond that, I have very limited information. Like I was spending a lot of my time just watching Champions Queue and studying the games that appeared, and I try to make sure that the boys get as much practice as possible outside of the scrimming environment to prepare us for the group stage. So I'm sorry to tell you, I have very limited information. Like at DRX, I think we scrimmed DRX and they were showing us a lot of interesting stuff that they brought up on stage, and it was very interesting to scrim against Beryl. He's just as crazy in scrims as he is on stage. Zeka and Kingen, very good players with a lot of flair in terms of how they played, and mechanically very talented. And beyond that, nothing else to share. I felt like DRX was stronger than RNG in scrims. That's the one thing I can say.
No
Did you
rumors
play
from the other
against?
teams, though. The other
Did you play
coaches?
against top esports at all?
Nothing at all. No. It's like the issue we had is I was told by a lot of the teams that were already in groups, they already booked everything out with each other all the way throughout group stage. So we were in a position where we didn't qualify yet, so I had no argument. You know, they book with us. Come on, yeah. I had no pull there at all. So I just made sure to be very close with DRX and RNG. I was booking scrims with RNG through email. Like that's how we did it there. Like it was mental to just fucking write emails to book scrims. It felt very primitive almost, but at the same time not.
We've evolved into Discord only scrim booking at this point in time as an industry, right?
Yes. It was good to catch up with Tabi over email, though, ever since 2015 Worlds.
By the way, one thing I want to ask you, look, it's obviously a layup question, but I want to get your take on this, right? Bearing in mind all the problems with the scrims, like we've talked about, and the travel and people being ill and having to use a substitute to start the tournament, I think even a disadvantage. Look, here's the thing. There's an advantage and a disadvantage to playing planes. The advantage is you've got a chance to get some things together, practice on the patch, warm up. The disadvantage is everyone else who, for you, is a black box if you don't scrim them. They're just watching your games, just seeing how you play, seeing what you pick, etc. And you have to play properly to try and qualify. So what I would ask is this, coming into the group, I actually think in your group, everyone was saying, remember, like, this is a group where in theory, like, maybe even C9 beats Fnatic, all those fucking whack narratives, right? So a lot of people would have said there's no way Fnatic can get out of this group. If you look how it went, the win over T1, the game was close against DDG the first time around. Like, yeah, week 2 wasn't as good, but there's a world where you could have been in a tiebreaker in this group. So how do you evaluate the performance of Fnatic in the group?
I think essentially the second day, I think that we misplayed our 3v3s around bottom side and misplayed around Rift Herald in ways that we just couldn't recover from. It was the game against EDG where they played Jinx, Thresh, and we just died in the 3v3. There was a situation where against the Yumi as well, the Sivir Yumi, we got caught when we can't, and we had to give up Herald when we're not supposed to in the context of what is being drafted. And I think if you get past the lane phase, this is the initial thing. The past first 10 minutes, and you get actually to play a game that is a lot more simple, and you can play around the fights more, and the composition that we like to draft tend to play themselves. But we managed to fuck up things that the other teams were just a lot better at. There was the first game against C9. We had the 3v3 on bottom side with the Javan. We EQ'd in, and then the fight, maybe we could have just flashed with the failures, rooted the Jinx with no flash, and just won the game on the spot. Instead, we didn't.
Yeah, that was my question, because like that first game was so unlike you guys. Like the Poppy went all the way through the draft, like didn't get banned, didn't get picked, and like you picked the Jarvan instead. And I was watching Razork, and like you say, he didn't actually EQ flash at that bottom gank. And I was like, this guy's mechanics like just don't look good on Jarvan. I'm curious as to why you guys decided to go with like the Jarvan Soraka, because it was very different than what you had shown previously to Worlds in terms of your team style.
Yeah, and in that moment, C9 did pretty damn good prep. Like they caught us with our pants down in a way that they picked the champions that would be quite good into us, because basically the recipe that we followed was that we are going to pick a self-sufficient top laner that is a tank, a jungler that can be active level 3 and just be functioning on low economy, a mid laner that is going to be a mage in most cases, and then a bot lane matchup that provides some sense of volatility that potentially that we can win and gain advantages in. And they decided to just go Ornn, Orianna, Trundle, which already in most cases, if you're playing front to back into Ornn Trundle, you're going to be losing. So we already were in a spot where it was a lot harsher. Like in hindsight, we probably needed to pick jungle on 3 instead of dropping jungle, because we picked Trundle on 3. Picking Poppy into Trundle feels quite counterintuitive into Orianna too, and the AD that they chose was also not that good for Poppy, so we had to choose something else. We ended up on the Jarvan, and Jarvan is very bad in cases where you're just playing a game that is front to back. Jarvan's never going to be able to EQ in. If he does, he's going to die first, and you're just going to lose the game. So C9 definitely had the better draft in that game, and then we also misplayed. The Rift Herald situation was good for us. We had level 6 Jarvan against level 5 Trundle. We could have definitely won the game on the spot there if we played it out correctly, or the 3v3 on bottom side. I think maybe there could be a case for, like, maybe Aphelios could flash Q, root into EQ, silence of Soraka into 3v3 win. But those are always like the small details that can make you lose in a best of one against teams that know how to win. Like that game for C9, if they get an advantage, that game is just going to play itself. We're not going to find any comebacks with the draft that we had. There's just no way in hell that we're going to accomplish anything that is significant in a game like that when we're behind. And
did you feel like that was kind of a trap game? Because one of my many problems with the world's format is that these days at MSI and at Worlds, where you play 3 different opponents in the same day, is something that never happens to any League of Legends team outside of 2 days a year, once at MSI and once at Worlds. And the reason why they do this is because they can't hold all the tiebreakers until the final day, so they can't do what they did in the first round robin. You have to play each day's tiebreakers. Now, we could just eliminate this by doing GSL groups, obviously, and having a sensical format. But is it, like, how fucking hard is it to prepare for 3 different opponents in the same day?
I think on our end, we carried a lot of the information that we had in the preparation from the previous matches, which was still relevant because habits die hard. And on our end, like, my biggest fear was, it was just a question of time before teams actually figure out us, because we only played a certain way that worked for us. And the moment like C9 decided to draft as they did, it was very little wiggle room for us to push past that, because we always needed to make very difficult choices in draft about what we drop 4-5. Because if they sniped the correct champions, sometimes we would end up being in trouble. Like the first round against T1, we were very fortunate to get Lucian Nami 4-5. Like that was very good for us. They picked Aphelios Thresh, and they were happy to play that matchup. But we were also very happy to play that matchup, and Lucian Nami was a very big thing for us. And then after that, looking for Lucian Nami in the 4-5 felt very implausible coming into, of course, the second week. I think in terms of what adjustments you can do between the matches, I guess the only consolidation is that every team is kind of facing the same. Like we had to play the first match and the second match and then the fourth match. So you could maybe argue that the scheduling was harsher on us because we had to play the first 2 games and people got to view us before playing us. But I think on my end, I've found my peace that we lost because we deserve to lose on the day, and not related to necessarily the format. But I could see how the format could be a detriment to us in maybe a different scenario where the games were closer and we could maybe use extra time to prepare for the opposition between the games, because you get to see the opposition play as well.
One thing I wanted to ask you about was you actually yourself cited that one of the problems in draft obviously was Zeus had an enormous champion pool. I mean, everyone in the tournament's aware of that now, and there wasn't really much you could do against that, right? Obviously, this has been like a factor. If we look at the tournament now, if T1 goes to the final or even potentially wins World, it's seemingly going to be off the back of him. He's going to be the MVP of the tournament. What would you say about this top laner?
I would say Zeus currently is the best performing top laner. I think T1 has been saved. Not saved, that sounds so bad, but I think the fact that the meta is so open and there's so much variance in terms of what the game main focus would be about. Sometimes there's Syla, sometimes there's Akali, sometimes there's Fioras, Yawns. It changes the kind of fabric of what is needed in the game for your bot lane in the 4-5, rather than the playoffs meta that we had where there was a Zeri, Lulu, Yumi, Sivir every single game, and the whole meta was structured around those specific champions because it was all about get your Zeri or Sivir ahead and you're going to win the game. And that was like perfect for a team like Gen.G, right? They have everything streamlined. Peanut, everyone on that team know exactly what they want to do. And when you put gold in the hands of Ruler and a player like Chovy, you're rock and rolling. But now T1 with the matchup with Aatrox being a central point and the counter picks in the top side, I think this is where Zeus has been flourishing as a player. Before he was picking Nar and Mordekaiser and just trying to pick whatever everyone else is picking. Now he's completely unleashed, being allowed to play a lot of these counter picks. And I think the same thing can be said about the bot lane too. In essence, like I think the biggest reason why T1 beat RNG so easily was just because Korea had a better pool and they read Ming like a book. He was picking Nautilus into champions that is just terrible against. I think T1 was completely unleashed in this meta because Zeus gets to express himself as a player. Like we were banning Fiora, Aatrox on red into Jax, Camille, and we didn't think he had the balls to just blind pick Yone. Yone was fine. I don't think Yone was the biggest issue in that game. Like our issue was that we just fed the Siviyumi when we couldn't, and we fought in the team fights quite poorly. But all in all, I think Zeus, to me, seems like the strongest top laner. But it's such a vague thing for me always to say because it's always in the context of who you're playing with. I think 369 is perfect for a player like Kanavi because in terms of how they play together, dive top, in the space that Kanavi gets, I wouldn't want to put him together with Zeus because in that context, Zeus would probably be worse, right? So Zeus for T1 and the context of the meta has been playing fucking good. Very dangerous player.
I mean, yeah, for me, like, I mean, obviously, I've commentated Zeus all year, and I think at the beginning of the year, he was really overhyped in a lot of ways. I think it took him a lot of time to develop because obviously he had a up and down end to 2021. He was a rookie that year. It was his first time, and he had some really, really high highs and then some like medium lows. I don't want to say he had a lot of low lows, but going to this year, he was very hyped up, and everyone who is a new prospect in Korea always gets overhyped. And then he goes to
especially if they're on T1.
Exactly. Then he goes to T1. If you have a T1 jersey on at any point, you're going to be overhyped. It's just how it goes. And then I've been really impressed with his performances this Worlds because he has often been left out to dry by owner. A lot of the time, is playing more around bottom side. He ends up getting dove repeatedly on these champions like Gangplank and Jace. Gets extremely far behind in the laning phase, but then still farms incredibly well and makes big impact plays. Catches up in the mid game with bounty gold he picks up. Good side laning. He's side laning aggressively enough to actually get that extra gold, but not too aggressively to where he gets caught multiple more times. And if he gets caught, the team plays around that and makes a cross map play extremely well. So you have to either commit so many resources to shutting this guy down because he is going to perform even when behind, that T1 gets cross map plays, or you have to try to play against owner playing a strong bottom side and then he gets ahead on the top side. So he's just such a very difficult player to play around, especially when he's on these carry champs. Like his Jace really came out of nowhere, and we were watching that draft. We were like, well, this could work, but it seems really risky, seems really fragile. Jace isn't that strong in this meta. But then he pops off in the late game, despite going, 0-5 at the beginning of that game, 0-6, and then still does an incredible amount of damage, hits his shock blast consistently, on Gangplank, hits his barrels consistently, and it doesn't matter how far behind he is in the mid game. If he hits those barrels and gets a few shutdowns, then he becomes the most fed player in the game. Then he's doing 10,000 damage in a team fight. And the guy is actually insane. Like right now, he's definitely my front runner for MVP.
Contrast that with whenever you've seen this year as a fan, Western Jace players, where they're like, I have to get ahead early in the game, gank for me all the time, I must be up 3 kills and then accelerate the game. But this guy was just fucking getting wrecked, and then he was still like the most impactful player in the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's outrageous. And, if you look at Zeus's performance in summer, we talked about, we speculated that T1 would be better within this meta because when Yamato's, when you have to play around the bot side and the whole game is like functioning around like Zeri, Yumi, Sivir, basically, and you have to prop up the bottom side. So not only was Gumayushi kind of bad at these champions because T1 as a team functions around picking aggressive bot lanes that win the 2v2 naturally, and then having either owner or faker or both of them roaming into side lanes in order to get their side lanes ahead. And they couldn't really do that very effectively because Gumayusi and Keria were, Keria is also fundamentally not the greatest enchanter player compared to some of his other more aggressive, like his Nautilus, for example, which was perma-banned against him basically.
His Pike, which he doesn't get to play this tournament,
Yeah, this kind of shit. Like, he was the kind of engage button, and so that was also eliminated with the last meta as well. And then Zeus was like, well, I guess you're playing Ornn all the time, which is not the champion you necessarily want for this kind of player. Not that he's a bad Ornn player, but you can't maximize his value on Ornn. And also, I think there is truth to the fact that the Korean teams didn't do the same things that the LPL teams were doing on the same patches. Like, perhaps T1 could have played more Fiora like the LPL was doing. Perhaps, they could have played more Kale or something like that that we were seeing in other regions and other metas, but they were kind of in Korea meta prison, basically, self-inflicted, right? But I think when we look at now this World Championship and how open the meta is in general outside of mid lane, which is the champion pool is relatively small there right now, but every other position feels like there's a variety of different viable playstyles, which in turn has made this world's meta like super fucking great. I mean, just the number of champions we've seen, the number of different playstyles we've seen. And finally, I think the other thing that needs to be mentioned is that we've said this on the show before, but T1 has a very different style than any other team in this tournament, where they use the Sivir to make picks with Sivir speed, not necessarily to fight, front to back 5v5s. They're basically playing a lot of pick compositions, which was their specialty in spring when they won LCK. And they have a really high core competency at running these styles of compositions, and they're world class at it.
They're really good at dive. So if you're committing resources to killing Zeus, they're going to dive your bottom lane. Owner loves playing around bottom lane, loves playing champions he can dive on. I think Owner is so mechanically good at setting up these dives that if he has a straight up, like, this is your plan, this is how we're playing this game, he does incredibly well. I personally don't think he's the smartest jungler we have in the LCK by any means. I think Peanut is way ahead of him in that regard. I think Kanavi is definitely a smarter pathing jungler, which could create problems for T1 in that best of 5 coming up. But if T1 have that plan of, we're going to play around top side, or we're going to play around bottom side, like one of these things, and they kind of set it up from the beginning, yes, it's quite predictable, but he is so good mechanically, even if you know it's coming, he sometimes does it so well. I think that's part of why Keria plays a lot of these engaged supports, so they can set up these dives, even if it doesn't make sense for the lane matchup. If they're just going to 4v2 dive it over and over and over again, it doesn't matter. And then Zeus survives top side on low resources, then carries later on, so you're winning both sides in this equation.
Yeah, and it's like the same champions that you would see any other team use in a different context. Like I said, like the Sivir, for example, or let's take Keria's Tom Kench and the Varus from their third game versus RNG. You might think, well, wow, we're going to use this Tom Kench to protect the Varus. No, it's actually a pick composition, and Korea's fucking engaging on you from a screen away, and that's being chained into a Varus ult to keep the CC there. Other teams do not expect this stuff to happen, because T1 just takes the tools and repurposes them to suit their style. And that's what's so great about watching them.
Keria's like, I'm going to devour to give the guy who's diving more shields and just spin him right back out. And we're going to actually keep pushing this. Nobody's getting out of here. Nobody's retreating. We're pushing it all the way. Completely different play style. By the way, not even a top 3 AD carry really in the LCK. No. Individually in lane, he's set up by his team, giving him resources and playing around that bottom side so well, especially in a meta where bot was so important after we got these late game scaling carries coming through with the durability patch and stuff like this. Guma looks really good because he's set up to look good. Individually, though, most people put him behind even players like Prince. So I think that context is important when you look at how T1 operates and how they leave Zeus, but then play around bottom side so well.
I feel the need to add about the Jace game that was played, because like he had a 0-6 stat line, but there is no other way to play it. The thing is, the moment you die with Jace on the timing gank, on the level 3 on the cannon wave. Like that's probably one of the biggest reasons you don't want to play Jaces, because most jungle clears right now is going to be Red, Raptors, Gromp, and be level 3 before you hit the cannon wave. And this is where you need to squeeze an advantage against the Doran Shield. Fiora, if you don't press your advantage there and stack a wave, and you let the Fiora stack a wave into you, you might as well just never play Jace. And this is like the biggest issue that you face. The moment he dies there and he burns Flash, he is meant to die whenever Sejuani wants to kill him. Because any bush she can trap, he will never be able to find valid information through topside ever again, because 2v2 is always going to be weaker. And every time Sejuani, Azult, and Fiora decide to want to kill him, they can kill him. So he has to make
Or
a choice.
dive him, either way.
Yeah, they can dive him, they can kill him in the middle of the lane, in front of the lane. At any point within the lane, he can just die if they want to kill him. He needs to outplay or wait for his team to give him information through bottom side. So he's just meant to die. Or he can be 100 CS and stay on his tier 2, or he can be 250 CS 06 and just play the game and hope that whenever it occurs that this is going to be valuable enough for the team. Sejuani burns ult, maybe they get a Drake or something like this, or maybe Sejuani shows on the map somewhere, maybe Fiora needs to TP, or the map opens up in a way where turrets are gone and you can catch the waves on your side of the map without any danger. Him going 0-6 after going 0-1 in that moment is just written in stone. He just has to play like that. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the counter side of that too was the way that game played out was that the Sejuani obviously did keep coming top to continue to push the advantage for Fiora, so that you would have an extremely strong split pusher in the late game. But the counter of that is that T1 also knows that, and they were able to get insane value out of diving bot lane a million times, right? So it went both ways, and I think that was one of the things that was very interesting about that game was we had two very fed players on opposite sides of the map, which made, the mid-late game super fun to watch.
Let's talk about the JDG Rogue series. So obviously it was a quick one, and then obviously we can set up the semi-final. We'll just do each side of the bracket like that. So one thing I'll say on this is, obviously I was half joking on the show when I said it'd be 3-1 for fucking Rogue or whatever. That is also because me and Monty did make a bet where they were 9-1 or something mental like that. So we were also just riding the copium train. But I will say this, mate, if you ever were one of the skeptics of JDG, like a lot of people were coming into this tournament, that was a fucking show of force, that best of 5, because even in the game where people were like, there's a chance for Rogue, it's mate, they were barely ever even getting the tiniest little edge, and then the second they would they would just they would still trade even and so you could just see from the way that game was, there's a reason no one from Rogue was crying, because it was impossible to win. You could never have won that series the way it played out.
They didn't seem like at any point.
Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say the meme with 369 in the community, across the world, is it the 3, the 6, or the 9, right? And he's rolling high 9s a lot this tournament, but
he rolled some 3s on.
He has had some 3s. The Cannon game was a big miss for me, and I thought the way he tried to set up for flanks, or rather didn't. It was not good, and his team didn't set him up for success there. So it does seem like he needs to be on champions where he can actually be frontlining and actually pushing in the front of a fight, and not actually setting up for a side flank, because he seems to be, at least so far in this tournament, fairly weak at setting up for those flanks. So, we consider, the Rogue series aside, what happens for him going forward against T1, it could be very concerning, considering how good Zeus is at playing that side style and actually locking him out of these types of fights. But I've been really impressed with Kanavi. I think Kanavi has been insane. I think he's been the best jungler so far this tournament. His pathing is great. His gank setup is amazing. He also reads his opponent's jungling positioning really well. You could tell sometimes that he's giving information to 369 or Yagao, hey, play back. Because you'll see sometimes Yagao or 369 will actually play back without actually having vision, because he's actually able to identify where the enemy jungler is based on the pathing, where he last was and stuff like this. I don't know this for a fact, but it seems like Kanavi is really good at communicating, to his team where these players are at any given point in time. Not shot calling per se, but just sharing information. And that makes him very terrifying to play against.
Well, his team also plays super well against him. I mean, you watch that first game that he played on Graves against Rogue, and it was just a fucking pathing clinic. I mean, he dictated the entire course of that early game, and he basically put he put Rogue in a really awkward situation where basically they couldn't do anything with Vi. Like, they couldn't get into the right lanes that Vi wanted to get into, because the way he took the camps basically forced Vi to farm on the opposite side of the maps that the timings dictated where she needed to be to gank. So it was like, okay, you're either going to gank and maybe this will work, maybe it won't, or you're just literally going to starve. Like, you're going to starve out of all of the golden XP. And it was brilliant. I mean, it's really, really fun to watch Kanavi play right now.
Yeah, on our end, like in terms of how we educated ourselves through how some of the teams globally played, JDG was always the go-to for me in terms of finding examples of how to appropriately dominate the map through 3v3 topside. I feel like they are very, very sharp on making sure that their champion combinations are always very strong with one another. I feel like this is always something that is like what JDG is looking to do in terms of the synergy between the mid, the jungle, the top side, for the Rift Herald fights, for the potential dives, and at the same time, I believe that the wave management of Yagao and 369 always sets up Kanavi for success, and the precision of their timings is what I believe all of the people that think JDG is going to beat T1 is going to be the big difference maker, because I feel whenever they have advantages too, they tend to be very, very disciplined, and I don't think they're going to throw away a game like RNG did against T1 later in the stages, where T1 can begin to flip around the Rubik's Cube and begin to solve the game in a way where you slowly claw yourself back into it. I think JDG, their top side is just insanely precise, and it truly has been an inspiration to learn from throughout the entire year, not only after this Rogue series.
Yeah, I think
go on, keep going.
I think what's interesting about the Rogue series as well is that it was a very bad matchup for Rogue. I think both Rogue and JDG have not been particularly strong in the early stages of the game. What's interesting about JDG is that after going 6-1 in group stage, they only had, I think they were up about 300 gold at 15 minutes on average, which when you're winning 6 out of 7 of your games is quite unusual to have that stat be that low. But it says, like, when you give this team early game advantages, they're going to win the game. And if you don't, even if they give you early game advantages, they might still win the game. I mean, we saw this in the best of 5 with top esports. They are insanely good at finding the one angle to like come back into the game, and they're insanely good at team fighting in the mid and late game as well. So they're constantly dangerous. And I think if you look at Rogue, they also were not performing kind of as well in the early and mid game, and they were getting some of their wins, especially in week 1, by playing very well in terms of their macro in the mid and late game. But the thing is that they're basically, like, in many ways the worst version of JDG. And so it was always going to be, I think, a very, very difficult matchup because they weren't finding those angles. It's also what made the DAMWON versus JDG game so interesting, because DAMWON has actually been incredibly dominant in the early game. They've been really good at getting first turret, first herald, like early objectives in the game, getting effective early ganks and gold leads. It's just that they fall apart later on, right? Because their strategy and macro just doesn't hold up, and oftentimes they would just get outscaled in those JDG games. But that's what made the JDG games versus DAMWON so fun to watch. It felt like there was this really cool stylistic tension that was happening.
I also think JDG. This is like not a hard analyst point, but it is just something I've noticed with them from watching them in their LPL playoffs run is they're pretty fucking clutch. Like they don't mess up these late game fights. They will engage harshly. They will take a risk. They will put it all on the line. They won't, just kind of faff around and wait for someone else to make a mistake. They will actually be very aggressive, and they will hard engage, which again is something that I think that comes from good communication in this squad. And I think JDG is very terrifying in those late game scenarios, even when they're behind, is because they will see blood in the water, they will commit hard, and they're a very punishing team a lot of the time. So despite your lead, if you make one mistake, they will actually clean up those fights. They'll take a late game bounty set across the map, they'll take those bounty turrets, and then suddenly they're right back in it.
Yeah, I will say, by the way, that whole angle of like Because the thing is, people try. This is how you had Hopium for Rogue. You had to use the logic, like they are pretty good at farming Yamato, so they can get ahead. And then it was like, and JDG, look, you can't always just be behind and team fight your way back in. Like, spoiler, some of the greatest teams of all time, SKT, G2, that's exactly what they did. And I have to say, JDG was as advertised. Like, the joke is, they actually flip the psychological burden of you're the one that's ahead onto you. That makes you have pressure because you're like, fuck, they can win from even behind and they're winning now even when I have an advantage. I just got kills. Like, that actually will make you like drain you psychologically. What happens is, it's like when you played the old G2 team, you just feel like it's inevitable. Eventually they're going to win those fights. Eventually they're going to turn the game. It's you that feels like you're on a timer instead of in League of Legends. You're supposed to feel like I'm snowballing the game. What do you think, Yamato?
My impression from how Rogue looked like in that game, it felt like they knew what we saw. Basically, this inevitable force, because it looked like they were doubting themselves in whatever action they took, because it seems like they believed more in the action of the enemy than their own action. Because all of the fights they were taking were always like, are we going, not going? It was kind of never decisive enough, but at the same time there was a hint of desperation that, oh shit, we need to look for something. I felt like that in the games where like Lush, I remember Trim was like flashing forward with the bubble and like just hoping that it would hit, and then it missed, and then all of a sudden the game is completely fucking over, and it was just a hint of this desperation. And I think that the analogy or like the comparison between how it felt like to play against G2 in the past, it definitely felt that way playing against G2, and I can imagine that Rogue went through that same motion that. You could just see clearly that they are many steps ahead in many facets of the game. They just figured out their basics, and their level of precision was gorgeous to see in terms of how good they were at around the best base timings to be there first on Drake, in terms of how they based generally, how they distributed their gold, how Kanavi just paths, and how everyone plays accordingly to that, and everyone just being on the same page, being aligned, and being aligned at such a high level. It's just the beauty of League of Legends, I felt like, and I don't think Rogue stood a chance in this match, sadly.
No one's talking about this. I looked into this a few days ago because I noticed one of the coaches for JDG, one of the Korean head coach, looked really familiar to me, and so I looked up who he was, and he's Homie, or I don't know what you pronounced him, Hom in English. He's called Homie in Korean. And he actually was one of the OG old top laners. He played for MVP, then transitioned to Samsung, then went to coach for like Vici Gaming in China. So this guy actually has basically been, involved in high-level Korean League of Legends or Chinese League of Legends for a decade now. And obviously, I think it's really cool to see that he's still actually around, and he's now on a top Chinese team. He's been on other top Chinese teams, but never, I think, at this peak level before. Because we're talking about some of the greatest coaches and greatest players becoming coaches. We have Bingy in this tournament. We have Score in this tournament, right? And, Koma, technically the head coach of DAMWON, but it's really Danny who's doing the coaching right now. But you have all these legends together, and maybe he actually gets to put some real credit on his name, I think, to the Western fans who don't know who he is. And I didn't even know he was coaching this team until I looked it up. I recognized his face when he was standing behind the players, so I went and looked it up. But it is crazy.
Song also with DRX.
Yeah, Song. So, like, it's maybe a time to give this guy some serious credit for how he's transformed this team over this year, and how far he's pushed them, and how great he's forced the communication, the timings, how Kanavi is working really well with him. Obviously, Korean synergy there definitely plays a part. So I'm curious to see, if after this tournament, if he actually gets more recognition, because there have been so many Korean coaches that have come to China that have gotten insane recognition. I feel like his name isn't really popping up for most people. Most people aren't really talking about him. So just wanted to bring this up because I do think that maybe in the future this is a guy who could come back to Korea and actually do great things. Who knows?
Potential future T1 coach.
Truck some money. Truck some money maybe first, then we can get the trucks later.
future T1 fan truck target. But I think it is true, especially with T1 as well, that part of the success has been kind of empowering Bengi, because they basically, Faker was the coach of the team for much of the year, because obviously Polt is not knowledgeable. We've talked about this before. Polt is not super knowledgeable about League of Legends. He was always playing more of the general manager role, even when he was head coach, and now he's just officially that role. And Bengi's taken over. Polt is not on stage during the drafts anymore, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that also has been a big part of the T1 transformation. But it is very interesting to see like these OG players all at Worlds and kind of all doing very well. And we can see that they're doing well because they've had very interesting drafts or very successful kind of strategic pivots, and also because the players and owners are speaking very highly of them. I do think we should talk about the matchup between T1 and JDG because for me this is just like such a potential absolute mega banger. The stylistic matchup is like deeply interesting. The individual matchups are deeply interesting. Like 369 versus Zeus is hype as fuck. So I want to get everybody's thoughts on how this is going to play out.
For me, it's really tough to call, right? Like, yeah, for me, it's really tough to call. Like my prediction for the DRX series we just watched last night was that it was going to be a 3-0. Like whoever gets the lead early is just going to 3-0 it because the playstyles are super similar. I think in this case, it's very opposite effect where I think the playstyles are so opposite of each other in a lot of ways that, yes, JDG is really good at timings and playing around topside, and Yagao is a great facilitating mid laner, so is Faker. Like there are some aspects that are similar, but the main difference for me is I think Kanavi and Owner are complete opposites in that, just like Peanut and Owner are complete opposites, I think Kanavi is more like Peanut in that he's insanely smart in terms of his pathing. He knows how to punish really hard. He knows how to camp really hard. He's a brain jungler, not a hands jungler. Whereas Owner, I think a lot of his strengths, not to say this guy, I always have to put this caveat, not to say I don't think he's smart or that he actually doesn't path well, but that's not his greatest strength. His greatest strength is his mechanics and being told where to go and then using his abilities. So, Faker tells him where to go, he goes there and he plays it perfectly, right? That's what it feels like watching Owner play. And I think this actually does favor JDG because in terms of the top lane, I have 369 versus Zeus, both incredibly strong laners. Zeus right now has had stronger individual performances, but if the game is going badly for T1 at the bottom side of the map too, then it doesn't matter. You're going to end up losing out. You won't be able to have those same sort of carry performances as Zeus. So I think the jungle is going to be insanely important, and I think to a certain extent, yeah, Owner can play these dive champions and dive bottom lane really well, but it's not going to last forever in a best of 5. And I think smart jungle pathing and coaching that revolves around Kanavi's more flexible playstyle, where you can play around top side, mid, or bottom extremely well, whereas Owner more bot side focused. Or if Owner gets tricked in a game where he gets invaded, he has to do vertical jungling. He doesn't perform as well in those types of situations. That's one reason why the more I think about this matchup, even though I really want T1 to win it, I think T1 performed better in their quarterfinal match. I'm kind of leaning towards JDG a little bit right now because of the jungle matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kanavi has excellent mechanics and is one of the smartest. I think he and Canyon were the most complete junglers overall at this event. I look forward to talking about Canyon versus Peanut because that's a very interesting conversation to have. But yeah, I think if you look at T1, they are going to have to rely. Like we talked about earlier, they have these pick compositions. Both JDG and T1 are the best at punishing mistakes in this tournament because if you are slightly out of position, you will die. You will die from very far away, very far away. Like they know how to engage on you. They know how to chain their CC from a long distance. They know how to find these windows. I think the thing with T1 is that they play more of these freewheeling skirmish compositions, whereas JDG tends to play more 5v5 team fighting, which is why we're going to see this excellent tension develop between which team is going to get their way. Are we going to see T1 just piling into a side lane and trying to force these 3v3s throughout the game or pick somebody off before going to an objective, which has been the hallmark of their style this year? Or are we going to see JDG, very skillfully negotiate like a 5 versus 5 dragon fight? I think the thing about T1 is that they are one of the best teams in the world at reading win conditions of the enemy composition, controlling vision and setting traps for those win conditions. So I think this whole thing is going to be extremely fascinating. I think it's maybe slightly JDG favored, but not like maybe by like 55. Like it's not going to be a stomp. This should be a very compelling best of 5.
Well, one thing about the stomps, though, I think we will see a lot of very one-sided games, even if it goes back and forth and we go to game 5s. Because these two teams are so momentum-based, like if JDG gets a lead, like you said, they don't let it go. T1 is the same. That's what they did in spring. That's when they had that insane win streak where they were just getting ahead and just taking all of the map. Very snowbally teams. Now, that being said, even when T1 gets advantage, JDG's survival through these times has been very good, which is another maybe point in their corner. But I do think we might see a game one where one team just completely stops and everyone's like, oh, it's going to be a 3-0 because they don't understand the complexities of how that game became a stomp. And then it completely swings back the other way.
I'm just going to sit back and then if whichever team loses, I'm going to be like, so this LPL top laner can't even just play this champion even. He gets paid millions of dollars. And then just go, anyone, just see if I get all likes on Twitter and that. Exactly. Yamato, who have you got winning this one, mate?
I am leaning towards JDG, but ever so slightly. I would say that my main concern for JDG is games like that third game against Rogue, where they did struggle in bot lane when they had to face very specific counter picks. They had to face the Kalista and the Soraka. I believe, if I remember correctly, I was going to pull it up real quick. They fucking played Lucian, Nami into Kalista Soraka and they got 2v2 killed and they were looked very wonky in that situation. And I think this is where I believe T1 got a very, very big advantage in their series against RNG, where they blind pick Ashe Heimerdinger, the enemy team picked Nautilus into it. The next game, there was
that
a
was real
situation-
bad.
The next situation, there was the Renata on 4, and then they picked Nautilus into it once again, and Zaya had the best game of her life. Like I can't think of a better spot to pick Zaya. Matchup-wise, perfect in terms of everything that is going to be thrown at her in the game. Whenever you're playing against champions that need to commit very hard in order to pressure you, Zaya is going to have a fantastic time. And the question for me is, how well can JDG maneuver themselves around their champion choices to put themselves in positions where they're not going to, completely grief the draft and also make the game very difficult for JDG to play from that position? Because I think that's where T1 can get advantages. Can they squeeze top lane matchups that are very Zeus favored in terms of counter picks? Will the pool of 369 blind picking top laners, will that dry up, or will they have strong, solid top laners and strong blinds for bot that allows them to just play the game in a more standard way? I think if they manage to achieve this, I think that JDG in a more standard game is more precise in terms of how they get consistent leads, in terms of how they move around the map. I'm more excited about Yagawa and Kanavi together, 369 and Kanavi together in terms of how they move together on the map. And I think this is usually that level of consistency is what can win you a lot of games in the long run, because I do believe that they have strong players. But the caveat is, can T1 create enough chaos in the draft on bottom side and in top to make the game go to that point in time where they get an advantage and they are going to be in the driving seat? Because I think, Monte, what you mentioned, and also you, Wolf, what you mentioned, either team, when they get the lead, I think they're going to smash the game. And also, Monty, what you mentioned, like, I think T1 is very fucking smart at figuring out how to win the game regardless of what they draft. It's kind of like what G2 was in the past, where regardless of what they just piece together, they figure out, oh, this is how we have to play the map, this is what we need to look for, this is what we need to sniff for, and they are very, very good at that. I think that what was evident against RNG when they realized, this is the weakness of the enemy comp, they can't really pressure us, we make sure that we cover this point in the map and the enemy can't push through. If they enter, we poke them, Zaya can push far forward in the mid wave, and that's how we're going to make sure that the enemy team can't start Nash. And then they just dragged out the game for a very long time, and they were lucky on the Cloud Drake spawn. And I think this is something that T1 does super, super well. But I think it will come down to JDG making sure that they are in situations where they have strong blinds that can't be, that stylistically countered in the draft. Because I think Ming was a massive, massive weakness. I didn't think Gala played well, and I think I have higher hopes for JDG's bot lane. But if they have games like that, game 3 against Rogue, then I think T1 can run away with it. So slight favor for JDG for me.
About it though, it's like Hope and Missing have not been amazing in lane this tournament, right? Like,
Yeah.
that has
Yeah.
not been a massive strength for JDG. And I
Yeah.
think you bring up an interesting point too, which is like, based on the blind picks that you're talking about, does JDG actually prefer red side in this draft? Because if they take blue side, they are likely going to have to ban Caitlyn on blue side, which is what RNG had to do. Because under no circumstances can you allow Gumayusi to have Caitlyn. Like, that's straight illegal. And we've seen he has like a 80. I think he's like 8-1 or 7-1 on Caitlyn this year. And like if you watch LCK, you know
you put him on Caitlyn or Callista, and you're gonna have a bad time. That's just how it goes.
Yeah, but the Caitlyn, especially in spring, just became a permaban fixture because nobody could actually deal with his Caitlyn. He was just so oppressive with it. And you see that again with RNG, and they're taking the Caitlyn out of the pool. Like nobody wants to deal with Gumayushi's Caitlyn. And if it gets through, you will see why, unless there's a very special answer to it in this series. And the only answer that we've seen people attempt so far is Jhin at Worlds.
Jhin Leona.
Yeah, or you can play Karma into it, and like you can play Karma into it and like stop some of the pressure. But I just don't think that's going to be enough. Like people will underestimate how good he is at this champion. And, in that case, if they're taking blue side and they're having to blind potentially more than they would like, do they just take red side? Do they just opt into red side and try and get some more counter picks?
It's a really good question too, because Keria and Guma have played some of the craziest bottom 2v2s of all time in terms of champion pool, and like one-off strats they can do in a best of 5. They had such an insane large amount of them. So they can
play Senna Yasuo. Yeah. They play what, Sejuani?
They played Senna Wukong, right? I mean, there's a lot that they could do, right? So it is very difficult to be like, all right, I've got this specific bot 2v2 I'm going to play against Keria Guma because I think I know what they're going to do, because you can never really know what they're going to do, and they have a really nice response usually to these types of niche picks on the bottom side. So I'm actually kind of disappointed with Hope and Missing's performance. I thought, to me, going to this, I thought Kanavi was their top player, but Hope and Missing were the ones I was really saying, because I predicted JDG to win this Worlds. I was telling everyone, watch Hope, he's incredible, this guy is insane, he's second best player on this team. He is one of the best AD carriers, one of the only ones who could stand up to Ruler, but so far hasn't been great for them in the laning phase. So it's been a pretty disappointing performance from him for me. And I'm slightly biased because I was going around like knocking on doors and telling people he should know about this player, and he hasn't lived up to it.
Yeah, and I have questions too, because RNG was spending, after game 1, they have to ban the Heimerdinger, and then so now you have 2 bot lane bans that are mandatory in Caitlyn and Heimerdinger. Like, if you can't play the Lucian well enough, like all of a sudden this becomes a problem for you, which maybe they can't, based on what you said, Yamato, in game 3 versus Rogue. I am actually quite concerned about JDG's bot lane. As much as I have been a Gumayushi hater, more like just being honest about Gumayushi's limitations. It's a great.
No, it's hatred to say someone's only the 4th best in their role. That's it.
If you're a T1 fan, it's a war crime.
I mean, also, we can't mention that Korea is the best support in Korea, and that certainly maybe helps Gumayushi, and that maybe he wasn't looking good.
And maybe they played around the side all season long as well, and gave him dives and stuff.
So anyway, it's just illegal because he's on T1, obviously. And the fans there are very aggressive,
passionate Monty.
But yeah, I think it's interesting to look at some of these games and think about that bot lane in particular, because I think that's where T1 can get a lot of advantages. And also, we know what happens. Like, why we want to see Zeus versus 369 is like, Flandre hasn't been in form in LPL playoffs. He definitely wasn't in form at Worlds. So Zeus just slapping him around in the top lane and doubling his gold was an incredibly good performance by Zeus. But now we get to see him against the other best top laner, I think, at Worlds so far. And can he do that in some of these matchups? Like, that's going to be very interesting.
2 things to say. One, that old quote that hope dies last, absolutely fraudulent. Not true at all. It dies all the fucking time first. So secondly, just a little literature joke there for people. And then the other thing I would say is this. The actual factor that made me underrate JDG is actually the reason why I'm going to take them to win the semi-final. Because I thought in the group, look, G2 wasn't that good, and EG definitely isn't that good. So, how are they hanging around in these games? But I've just realized the thing about JDG is they just take you into the fucking deep water of messy games. And as someone said earlier, they're just so clutch. They don't ever look like they get phased. They can lose the game, but they look like they're perfectly comfortable, in an MMA analogy, fighting in a phone box where you're swinging haymakers and it's fucking getting crazy. Some people don't like that. I think T1's a team that doesn't like that. I think they like to be in the driving seat and know what they're going to do and know where they're going to get their ganks off, know what they're going to play through. So I think the key thing is, maybe there's a world where T1 stomps them, but I think JDG will just make this a fucking dirty boxing match, and they're just going to hit him with a little liver shot.
Clutch factor I was talking about earlier. They're clutch.
Both teams are. It's going to be fucking mental. This best of 5 is so hyped.
It's going to be sick.
All
Should we
right.
talk about the other side of the bracket then?
Yeah, I think we have to get into the other games because obviously people are going to be very excited to talk about the 2 5-game bangers that we saw. Even though DRX versus EDG is kind of a fraudulent banger, because I think if either of those teams played against basically anyone else in the bracket, they probably get rocked. But because they played against
I'm just going to say, Monty, the reason why the DRX one doesn't get to be a banger is because DRX won 4-1 in a BO5. What do you want?
Look,
we will talk about that.
We'll talk about that. I say DRX lost that game like 3 times before that inhibitor. You know, they basically. Okay, let's just do that one first. Then we'll save the actual gold match of Gen.G versus DAMWON Kia for last. But if we talk about the EDG versus DRX games, I think there are a lot of, obviously people will remember it because of the hype of like that inhibitor respawning, and like I just thought that we thought the game was over, and then like you're just like, holy shit, like the inhib respawned with like 1 auto left. But factually, guys, DRX threw that game like multiple times and like actually deserved to lose that game. Zeka got picked off when they had their first Baron. Deft got picked off when they had their second Baron, and then Deft also got picked off another time. And like they were just playing the actual macro around their advantages quite badly in that game, and really truly deserved to lose that. They could have closed that game much earlier for the epic Deft Ezreal teleport in, like shoot down the Nexus moment, and
Deft was
really fail it.
Deft was caught like below Wolves.
Yes.
Which is like most, that's the most like, where are you trying to really force an advantage here? Is your Ezreal, you're pretty safe, right? You have Arcane Shift, you can get out of a lot of scenarios, but he was in an area where he wasn't really gaining advantage. He was picked there, trying to chase and trying to force an advantage on the bot lane, I guess at that point in time. But as Monty mentioned, the trying to kill the Nexus with a sick teleport play, which was denied by an inhibitor respawn, which we can all forgive. Like, no one's going to be like, Deft should have known that, like, the inhibitor was going to respawn at this time. We could forgive all that. But that was basically Deft cheating a win, which would have been amazing if he actually pulled it off, because it would have been super smart. He comes in, he gets the win. He basically snipes backdoors as an 80 carry who has teleport, which is very rare and almost never happens.
Well, also people forget that JJ from the Baron pit canceled DRX's second TP with Sejuani, so it was almost just a 2v1. Like that could have ended the game if just one more player from DRX was there.
But it was basically like at that point, Deft almost stole the game away.
Yes.
And I think that's the way people will never look at this, is that Deft almost like basically cheated this one away with a really smart play where he backdoors and kills the Nexus. But because of all those picks that happened where he was picked off, and the poor team fighting that DRX had in the Baron fight prior to this, they didn't deserve the win, but oh no, the inhibitor died. It was really this, they almost stole the win, I think, is how I like to look at that one. As much as I love Deft, and DRX won in the end, so who cares?
Thing is, though, there's also a detail, Wolf, which is actually mental if you know the old school law, which Monty will know, which is Deft also famously fucked up a quarterfinal with a teleport on a fucking ADC in like 2015 or whatever it was, when they were in that one against Fnatic, and that was like an infamous game that made the whole narrative like Deft's the choker. Yeah, exactly, with the Jace one. So it would have also been so poetic justice to win that game on that and be like, I actually made the look. It took me, like, by the way, if people don't get it, I know some players play up to the cameras, but when they asked Deft, like, what do you think about being back in the semi-finals like 8 years later, the reason he was like breaking down is because, like, I think I only hit him then, like, what the fuck? That's how long it's been. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
I've been in like the hyperbolic time chamber my whole life. I know, exactly. Like, what the fuck?
It was like 2,900 days, almost 3,000 days, and like, yeah, I mean, it was a great interview, and like, it was a really wonderful moment, and I'm glad I think it was great of Shox to ask that particular question first. But yeah, I mean, it just goes to show, like, Deft has had a pretty, wonderful domestic career, whether it's been in Korea or China, but he has struggled at international events. He is on a very short list of players who are like kind of tragic that they've never won Worlds, right? Like, I don't know if you could make an argument that he is the best player to have never won Worlds.
I mean,
I
he
mean, the
got
joke
top
is
8.
maybe going to play the next guy, Chovy. It's the two of them, right?
Yeah.
He got top 8 in every Worlds he's appeared in, right? And obviously this is his second top 4. So he's always been able to consistently perform in Worlds. He's been in more Worlds than most players. So, I mean, you consider that in itself as an accomplishment, but you're never happy with that. You want to lift a trophy. You know, you want to get to that finals. You want to actually be a world champion before you retire. And it gets harder and harder as you get older. And that's, I know we don't, like, Deft is not old, so don't get us wrong. But in terms of pro gamer years, he is quite old. Like, he's quite experienced, you know, and he doesn't have that same sort of I'm rising to fame. I'm rising. I'm a new star. Like, I'm building up. I'm getting famous kind of thing. He's already famous. He's already achieved almost everything there is to achieve. He's just got this one last thing to grab, and I don't think any of us are going to predict that that's going to happen, considering the opponents left for him. But it would be so cool and so insane if it happens. And everyone has said, no, he's not going to do it. It's not going to happen. He's not going to Worlds. Too bad he's sixth place in the LCK. And he just keeps saying, nope, I'm going one step further. I'm going one step further. I'm going one step further. And yeah, he didn't get the Nexus kill there, but he got the Game 5 win. And who knows how deep he could go. If he pulls off the upset against Gen.G, who's to say he can't beat T1 or JDG?
He won't be denied, Wolf. Even God tried to stop him winning that series, and it still couldn't happen. That's all you need to know. Deft skills better than God. That's fucking, what do you want?
What were your impressions
Also,
of that
you know, when
series,
people do
Yamato?
say that, you know, the Korean players always say that classic line in interviews, like, cheer for me and I will show good games. They're not trolling when they say that. They actually do all believe when they lose, they could have played better and practiced harder and won the game, no matter who they are. So the joke is, like, Deft really was like, all right, I did it, guys. And then, like, the joke is all the fans who were waiting since 2014 are like, they're off doing some, like, overtime, working in the fucking, like, working at the Kmart or whatever. Like, he actually did just grind for 8 years, guys. He's back. He's back finally.
Dude, this series was fucking wild because I felt like the majority of the progression within all of the games for any team to move forward was due to unforced errors. Like that game, the only reason like the game where the fucking Ezreal was hitting the Nexus, the only reason they got 2 inhibs on their Nash push when they shouldn't have was because Scout just got solo killed by Akali. And Scout was playing the Azir, and in all honesty, they shouldn't be able to break the base with that Nasher. They had 2 minutes left, and then they just happened to break 2 inhibitors in a situation where it should have been very difficult. And that to me was the story of that entire series. There was so many unforced errors that put both teams in positions where the compositions really didn't get tested in a way that they should around the Drake fights or around
I mean, Barrow was straight hinting on Heimerdinger for most of
Barrow
that
was
game.
fucking
Like,
jogging around. I don't know what the fuck he was. He was in the Matrix, like canceling bases or something. I don't know where he was. He was on a different plane sometimes, and there was so many errors that were so strange, and they happened due to, I don't know what, there was lack of focus or something. And I think for me, the biggest disappointment, because I thought like, I put Scout on my top list, you know, like in my top 3 coming into the World Championship as a player. EDG wasn't looking super strong because they got smashed by top esports and JDG originally, but I had high hopes for them. And looking at Scout, like even in the initial game, the first game, he's laning against Oriana's Azir. They didn't put the camera on it, but he was getting smashed.
yeah, he was getting wrecked. We were really surprised while watching it.
I don't know what the hell was going on, and this was, and then the Victor game, that should have been his game to carry, but then he got caught on mid in the Renato, had flash, decided to stopwatch instead of flashing out of it. Soraka E'd under him, he died, burnt his flash afterwards on a siege in mid due to Ezreal poke, and these are things that just can't happen. He could have carried that one game, and then later the easiest game to point to was of course the complete collapse in the Akali game against Silas. He plays it super well, burns the flash, flashes in, and then he misses 15 energy for the Q. You know, shit happens. But then it was just a continuation of like a spiraling down, because I did feel like in some of those games EDG had the better draft, and sometimes I felt DRX had the better draft, but it just wasn't relevant because so many unforced errors progressed the game for the team that managed to catch that error in and put it in their pocket and run away with it. There were Nashers that were taken, and there were Drake steals that were occurring from Pioshik left and right, and it wasn't like a methodical game. It was just a game of who would do the least amount of errors and who would stand tall in the face of that
Final moments? The final moments where it looked like DRX might throw.
Dude, was Was your butthole clenching, Yamato, when you saw Pyosik try that steal 4v5 when it was just completely unnecessary and like they could have just like waited for like they didn't have to take that Drake. They were in a very powerful position in that game. And I was like, really? You guys are gonna chance losing this for a flip steal onto Dragon for Soul when they will not get Soul off of this Dragon when you could just wait with your significant like golden experience lead. That was insanity to me.
We were all panicking.
It was crazy. I remember there was that one game, the fourth game, I believe, when the enemy team is doing Drake, and then DRX is calling, let's just all flash into the pit. And they all just flashed into the pit, and they just got murdered there. And I was like, what the fuck was that? They just, three people, like two people decided not to. So it was Kalista, Kabil, and Sejuani just flashed in the pit and started hitting the Drake, and they were just in a meat grinder. They couldn't cross this place. They didn't have flash. I don't know what the fuck that was.
I remember that moment you were talking about because it was also just pointless to try and like win.
Yeah.
Like you could just lose the game there if you fuck that up. And like, what was the point of doing that? Like, it wasn't some kind of fucking emergency where that one Drake was worth that much. They could have just given it up. I mean, the series even started weird because if you looked at the first game's drafts, DRX has such a fucking insane draft advantage, and we were sitting there and we're like, okay, so how does EDG actually win? Like, they're not gonna really be able. Like, first off, DRX started to get the priority on the Dragons. As long as DRX is there and setting up Heimer turrets. They have all of these kiting abilities, like volley from Ashe. You have the turrets. You have, you have smoke screen from Graves. You have the Orianna ball creating zones. You're not going to get a flank, right, with Flandre on Cannon. So, like, the one win condition is that Scout gets a fucking good ult. And lo and behold, they fuck up their control. Like, DRX fucks up their control over the Dragon. Scout just comes in, sweeps like three of them into the Cannon ult. And I was like, that was the only way they could possibly win. That was the only way. We were so fucking mad because it was just so stupid.
That game was silly as well because I think that shows like the class difference. Like they had a game of playing Graves, but they missed very important timings. They didn't pressure the Drake before the 6-minute mark, which meant that their Drake take always coincided with the Rift Herald spawning, which is a very, very big difference maker when you are drafting yourself into Graves, Ashe, Heimerdinger. There was one particular point where they dove bot, Lee Sin stayed in Fog, he took his blue, he took his Gromp, and Graves decided not to stay to take the respawn of the camps of Lee Sin. And all of those things put Lee Sin in a position where he kept up even in a scenario where he should, in theory, be invaded on bottom side consistently. Yeah. And this was something that the big class difference between the sides of the brackets of the best of fights that we saw. Like if you looked at how Kanavi played the Graves or I guess Kanavi is the best example. I don't need to that example in terms of how everyone plays around those timings and how they keep squeezing and never let go of that, having that foot on your throat when you're playing jungle. That just didn't happen. Lee Sin kept even, and they managed to always. Oh, the enemy is doing Drake, or it spawns right when Rift Herald spawns, and this was like a big problem for DRX in terms of how well the enemy team kept up in the game, and that's just the class difference that we are going to see as the tournament progresses, and hopefully, I don't know if that's going to be tested against Gen.G specifically, but if DRX played against a JDG, for example, that could be, a dangerous thing, but I don't think that's going to happen, so I don't even know why I bring it up.
I just can't believe we live in a world where post-Chovy, Pyosik is in a motherfucking world semi-final. What? Who had that on their fucking bingo card at the beginning of the year? What the fuck is that? It's not even like he's that good either. Like, I don't know. It doesn't even make any sense why DRX is in the world semi. No, nothing does. Like Wolf said, they weren't supposed to be even close to qualifying. Then when they made it, people, remember, I got them as like an underdog in that first game in the play-ins against RNG. Like, people thought they'll come out second there. Like, nothing like this. There's no way they were supposed to win their group. There's no way they were supposed to be, even and on paper, EDG is supposed to win this quarters. Like, the whole run's just a miracle run.
Could have been Croco.
Please don't.
Could have been
Does Croco dance like that? I don't think so, man.
We go to the Gen.G one then. Should we talk about the real fucking meat and potatoes of this playoffs?
Yeah, I think DRX did have some like really great highlight moments. Obviously Zeka in that final game. incredible performance on the Silas. Was gifted, that early kill there, but ran with it, did great things. Even got that like 4v5 quadra kill at the end after they stole the Ocean Drake to get the Ocean Soul. So really, I think some very strong individual performances. But I think that if you know League of Legends, you're looking at those games, you're thinking, wow, there was a lot wrong here. It was very exciting, but it doesn't give you a lot of hope that DRX is going to go further than semifinals.
Or if EDG had won, you wouldn't feel hopeful either, I don't think. So
no. Yeah, and the reason why is like the flip side of that is the Gen.G versus DAMWON Kia is probably one of the best of fives ever played at Worlds. Like, it was extremely interesting for a variety of reasons. You got to see the tension between these two teams. And we also have been fortunate to see this matchup so many times this year that you kind of knew it was going to be a banger because they played 4 best of 3s. They have all been 2-1s, and some of them have been equally as close as this series, including the most recent best of 3 that they played in summer, which had the crazy like Canyon Karthus game that went to like 45 minutes or whatever, and was barely eked out in a win for Gen.G that kept their amazing summer season, basically their record-breaking summer season on that pace. Right? If they lose that, then maybe they don't actually hit the same level of dominance. It would be a very different conversation. We also got to see the incredible banger series in the spring playoffs, which of course was the super similar to the Game 5 that we saw here in terms of the jungle invading and like early jungle advantages that were gotten by Canyon. This time on Kane, the last time on Nidalee, and then Peanut having to think his way out of a very difficult situation as he's like basically imprisoned by Canyon, and then he eventually wins the game, right? So I think this really showed off the strengths of both Gen.G and DAMWON excellently, and we got the same result that we always have, which is now we've seen 2 best of 5s between these two teams, and then 4 best of 3s this year. And they've all come out this way, exactly the same, which is why Wolf and I were saying, like, if you've watched this matchup, the thing about Gen.G is they can grind out these wins in the end, but it is a bad stylistic matchup for them because DAMWON plays them very close and is unpredictable, does have weird picks, is very good at using these weird picks, and Gen.G is a worse team at realizing enemy win conditions than, say, T1.
I think that Canyon is the only Korean, LCK Korean jungler that can compete with Peanut right now in terms of his strengths in pathing and understanding so many jungle matchups. And the Kane pick was really cool, and it was something that obviously DAMWON Kia had kept prepared for this best of 5, and it went pretty well. Obviously, Peanut was really forcing Canyon back in that game, despite being camped by him in that final Kane game, which was really cool to watch. So he could delay his transformation. The first time he had it in 10 minutes. Second time, I don't even remember. We stopped counting how many minutes
20 minutes
gone by. It was like 20, 22, something like that. So didn't get as much value. The second time around, they were better prepared for it. They handled it very well, despite Canyon's early leads. And I think that jungle is one of the roles right now that people are not talking about as much because it isn't as flashy in the late game team fights, but setting up for mid game, it's such an important role right now in this meta. And Canyon came out with another niche pick. We've been talking about this all year. On the Monty Wolf show, we're like, all right, wait for Worlds though. DAMWON Kia is going to show up. Looking weak in spring. Summer's still not performing as well. But what they were doing that no other LCK team was doing was they were trying new picks. They were trying new strategies. They had bigger, wider champion pools than any other LCK team. And I said, come Worlds, this team's going to have pocket picks. We're going to hit best of 5s, and they only got to play 1, unfortunately, because of the bracket draw, which is the one matchup I told everyone, I was like, I don't care what the bracket looks like, as long as it's not Gen.G versus DAMWON Kia in the round of 8. The Korean commentators were screaming and crying when the draw happened because it's the worst possible scenario because we got this in the quarterfinals, not in the semis, not in the finals. Really sad.
On my end, in regards to the series, I think it was very clear that Canyon knew that in order for him to win these games, that he needed to overperform because he was definitely in a lot of these situations squeezing water from stone. I think the idea of how hard Peanut got clapped was maybe a little bit overblown.
Overstated.
because I looked back at the games the day after, and I think in game one, masterclass. I think Kane could have just killed the Renekton on top. Gragas flashing and not getting anything out of it was a detriment for him later on. Could have killed the Renekton. That
Yep.
invade by dodging the wards was really fucking clever. I have only seen that in solo queue, and that's how it looked like Canyon was playing his placement games in terms
Yeah.
of how sweaty he was approaching those games. I think in game two, Seju, very good timing gank on mid, but I think the issue there was that Showmaker just placed his ward way too early, so it ran out, because usually you just place the ward as you go into lane, it would have spotted the gank, and he just died to this gank, and then very clever from Canyon to stick, to just go into the bot bush and kill the Yumi as they're pushing out, because they showed that Lucian Nami is basically Lucian based. Nami is pretending to freeze. Wukong was there, and then Yumi fucked up by using her W twice, so he knew the cooldown was there. And getting advantage on a champion that is so shit as Wukong, because the only hope for Wukong is that he gets fed and can dominate, because he can't click camps for shit. Like, he's basically massaging them with this fucking baton that he has. And then I believe in game three, I think Peanut actually outplayed him. But only because of that circumstance before. Canyon needed to overperform. Peanut went around, caught XP on the bottom tower. He was level 2. And then Canyon thought that he exited and he started to pull the Gromp, and then he died in that game, right? Even though that, of course, this was the game that DAMWON won in terms of that jungle minigame that occurs from minute one, because Canyon was fucking forcing it every game. Peanut had some moments where he did better, in fact. I think there was the game later. In terms of the Kane game, in the game 5, I think Kane was just a shit pick into terms of what the other champions that were showing, but I think he played really fucking good. That was like the biggest dominance, the biggest gap in terms of jungle I'd see, because Peanut looked very lost in that game. Game 4, I'm trying to remember what the fuck happened in game 4. That was just the game 4
That
was
was
the
the very
Viego.
one-sided. That
Yeah,
was
that
the
was
very one-sided
that was
game.
also really fucking brilliant from Canyon too. That was when he saw that the ward was placed, the ward ran out. He moved in, and then instead of fighting on the Gromp, he just hid himself and went to the top bush. The enemy only had 3 options: either he would face check him when he was in the bush behind the Gromp, or the Sejuani would cross into top, or she would queue over the wall and wait for her Q cooldown in the bush. So he just read that fucking perfectly, played around the wall that Seju placed. He knew he could hug the wall, and that level of precision is fucking insanity. Like those, the game 4, game 5, game 1, fucking masterclass. Canyon did his best in game 2, but I think Peanut had that Poppy moment, which was really fucking good for the game, but they ended up losing. So I just wanted to bring that to the table, that it wasn't like just a complete monster fisting in game 5, like all 5 games. There was some moments where Peanut was doing some good moves, like the Seju level 3 gank on mid, and the Peanut move, like the Poppy move as well, with taking XP in bottom side and then defending his own Gromp like that, hiding in the vision.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this too comes from the fact that people just don't understand how Gen.G plays the game and how stylistically different they are from DAMWON. DAMWON sets up Canyon so well to succeed, right? And the whole purpose of the way that DAMWON plays is they play through their jungle, and they can do it on fringe picks or off meta like carry picks, and they've done this all year. And you want them to win because they create scenarios where they have a lot of lane pressure and lane dominance, so that Canyon has a lot of freedom to move on the map, right? And this is a strategy that they've continuously utilized so that he can pressure people like Peanut. Now, Gen.G, if you look at how they were winning all of these games in summer, a lot of it was very early game junglers. It was Peanut, playing Poppy and flashing, behind turrets and shit like this to get Ruler ahead. He will sacrifice a lot himself in order to get his lanes ahead. And also, the later on into the game you go, the weird thing about Gen.G is that they will make very smart macro calls about sacrificing objectives to continuously farm or to take cross-map turrets. And so what is great about Gen.G often isn't even shown on the camera in the game, because you're watching a team take Dragon, and Chovy is getting funneled in top lane an immense amount of gold. And this is why I keep bringing up these stats, which is that Gen.G, at points in the summer split, were like 4% ahead of lane farm, total lane farm in the game, versus compared to any other team in the world. And they had almost 60% share of jungle camps, which is crazy to think about. They are just so efficient at extracting gold out of the map that you see them sometimes lose, or Peanut sacrifice himself early, and then all of a sudden Ruler and Chovy are just funneled. There's like all the gold is just like shoved down their throat, and then they come back for a critical fight in the mid or the late game, and they don't mind giving up objectives in order to get into this game state. And people don't like that because it's not exciting. Like, you know, it's like you may hate it, but
there's no killing except of the minions.
You may hate it, but this is what peak performance looks like, and they are the best team in the world at doing this. So I think that's why it's frustrating, because fans see the level of dominance that Canyon had in some of these games, but also you have to ask, like, what is the price of this dominance? Like, is Kayn actually super useful in the late game? Did it require a Syndra pick so that they would have mid priority in order to make this work? And what does that look like in the late game? You know, that late game wouldn't even have been close if Canyon hadn't had the epic flank and knock
The
up.
knockups, the stun.
Yeah, the
was amazing.
3-man knockup that set up like the Syndra. So, like, is that really smart to base your strategy around like making the epic outplay? If you know what I mean. Like, I think it's tough, and this is why people have a lot of frustration when watching Gen.G, or they prefer DAMWON style of gameplay, because it's much flashier, it's much weirder, it's much more compelling, but they're not a super good team when it comes to mid and late game macro and shot calling, and the price of having these really cool early games is often just kind of like sputtering out in the mid and late game.
I do wonder, you know, on a future note, what I think these two teams will potentially be the most negatively impacted by Riot's new jungle changes for 2023, especially like the ones where if you do less damage to the enemy camps and stuff like this, because these are what these two junglers excel at, is actually counter jungling and actually finding advantages in the enemy jungle, finding these pathing answers. So we don't know what else Riot has in store for 2023. They might take away even more stuff from the jungle, so which would be really sad, because I think that these two players' intelligence with their role is so well expressed right now in this meta. I think got even better in the durability patch. So hopefully they don't get nerfed to the ground next year, because I would really hate to see that.
I wanted to add as well in regards to the series, like DAMWON in both game 1 and 2, they had winning positions. Like after the game 1, like a lot of the focus.
They should have won game 2 for sure.
Yeah, like game 1, they dove the bottom tower to use the Herald when they didn't need to, and then they heavily misplayed the fight in preparation for, I believe, what was the third Drake. They had the Gragas ult, the Kayn W, Nami ult, anything to cancel the misfortune, but they played that fight very, very poorly, which is, of course, in a game that you know, sometimes you misplay fights. I'm not pointing this, but I felt like the first 4 games that we saw, I felt like overall DAMWON played better. And sometimes you lose games because of reasons, but I felt like DAMWON was definitely looking like the better team after the first 4 games that I saw. Coming into the game 5, they really squeezed the jungle pool, and they targeted really good bans, I think, with removing the cartels, because I think that's what they were aiming for. And they picked Kayn in a spot which was really, really rough for him, and Syndra pick was also like very, very bad, generally speaking, and Gen.G could just hold out long enough for everything else to be relevant. I remember that game as well. Victor was very far ahead and managed to pick up some kills, and that's not something that you really want to happen to any Victor, and especially Chovy on Victor that is not going to miss a single CS in the game. But I felt like DAMWON played quite good, and I can understand. You know, the first game they opened up the Yuumi because they didn't want to put their bot in a situation where they are tested on their depth. I get that, and I think in the second game, I think their intention, I could only read it in 2 ways. That they are either working with the assumption that the enemy is going to ban Yuumi, and they prepare the Lucian Nami again with the Aphelios ban. And then I think also there's another layer to it where I think they didn't have prepared to play any other AD with Yuumi besides Sivir. And the moment Sivir ban
That's what I
came,
said earlier, yeah. Like, they didn't expect the MF for sure.
They got completely schmurdered, because we were scared of this situation too. Legit, we when we were preparing our draft, I was like, boys, if the enemy team doesn't ban Yuumi 1-2, we are banning Yuumi on 3. That was our situation on blue side, because on blue side it's a lot trickier to find the right answers into the champions that you want to pair with Yumi, generally speaking, right? I feel like our game against EDG, they didn't have good matches, good picks with Yumi at all. And if we played standard, probably the game would be better. But the T1 game, they had all these fucking Silas and the Yon and the Ninja picks and so forth. They found them in a really deep way on red side when they were blue side. But all in all, I think that game, I think they just got completely fucked by the Civi ban, and I don't think they wanted to play Yumi Misfortune at all. And they're like, what the fuck do we do? I guess we pick Lucian. What the fuck? Because if the enemy team decides to not pick Yumi 1-2 and they decide to pick Lucian and you don't want to pick Yumi, then you giga fucked because you banned the Ferries yourself. So I think they just got hit with a right hook on stage with the Civi ban.
Should we talk about the semis?
Well, hold on. I think to your point too about like DAMWON winning, people will look at game 2, but if Peanut doesn't steal that Baron, like they basically ended up in a very fortunate situation where Peanut stole the Baron, neither Doran nor Chovy died, which meant that they have this extremely strong 1-3-1 split push with a Baron buff all of a sudden with Yone and Camille, and there's no way to answer both of those side lanes for DAMWON, right? If Peanut doesn't steal that Baron and DAMWON can like force them to group around objectives, that game probably is won by DAMWON. Like, and even if Gen.G gets that Baron, but either the Camille or the Yone die, I'm not sure they finished that game because it was such a, like, the compositions just wanted to do two very different things. So whoever got Baron was going to be able to force their will upon the other team, and I think that team wins. And the fact that I believe it was Peanut who died during that steal,
yeah.
But the fact that Ruler and Lehens also still had Baron, so you could pressure all three lanes at the same time. That's when like the gold lead started to like balloon out of control for Gen.G. But that game was really on the knife's edge.
I remember that fucking game because I felt so sorry for Canyon. Like, I remember, like, they are doing Nash, they have Azir Gragas, they are not pushing the fucking Sejuani away, they see her the entire time, they refuse to burn their flashes to secure this Nash, and then later there was this fight where Lucian both had stopwatch and flash and didn't use any of them on the Yon ult, so you just got one shot in a fight that was completely over and winning. It was truly like heartbreak because it always seemed like, oh, this is Canyon's effort. Holy shit, this is so insane. And then God bless Showmaker had his back with the Swain game. That was a fucking thing of beauty too. That was probably the best Swain I've ever seen ever. Like, that was the best Swain performance ever. Thought he would have a hard time into Lucian Nami, but he just punished whatever Chovy, what the fuck he was trying to do at the Raptor camp.
Showmaker might be like an MVP candidate for this tournament if he had advanced, right? Like, I mean, the guy has had insane performances after really underperforming all year long. That Swain game was actually crazy.
I mean, that was another game where I was like, is the Swain even fucking playable? Because he's playing it into Maokai, Poppy, and Azir. It's like, how the fuck does this guy across all those three ults even get in range? Right? He's going to get bounced out by Azir ult. He's going to get rooted by Maokai ult. He's going to get ejected from combat by Poppy ult because he just stands in the front. You got Nami wave as well. Like, I was like, how the fuck is this guy going to play League of Legends in this game? And he found a way. He found
very
a way.
Good positioning, very good pulls with his never moves. To answer Thorin's question, do we talk about the other semi? No, not really. No.
I mean, I'd set it up like this, Wolf. Here's the problem. You said it earlier. Everyone who's an LCK fan hoped if DAMWON was great, maybe this is the final, maybe this is the semi-final. The problem is, at least it was always going to be a good match, Gen.G against DAMWON, because as Monty pointed out, every time they've met this year, it's an amazing matchup. It's one of the best, like, stylistic matchups in the world. The problem is, the next one is the most ass possible LCK semi-final you could have. It's a team that's like far and away the best in the LCK, the team that isn't supposed to be here. And so, spoiler, you know, earlier when we mentioned, like, and then everyone was saying, Deft, you can't do. No, we're going to do that now. We're all now going to explain that you're not going to the final, Deft. It does end here. You might not even win a fucking game. There's no advantages anywhere, and it's just over for you. See you in the finals, JDG or T1, right?
Zeka made a Twitter last night, and his only tweet is like, I'm playing tomorrow like it's the finals.
Okay. All right. Well, to be fair, he's not going to be in any finals anyway, so don't worry about it, mate.
I said this on our Monty Wolf show about the Worlds qualifiers. when we were talking about all the different ways these teams could collide with each other, KT and Live Sandbox and DAMWON Kia, because there was a world where DAMWON Kia also potentially could have not been here. And the one thing I think we all agreed on was we didn't even talk about them that much. We were like, well, DRX will absolutely not make it. So let's move on and talk about the more important things, the subtleties of how KT matched up against Sandbox, how DAMWON matched up against KT, how DAMWON matched up against Sandbox. And we were talking about this kind of rock, paper, scissors of how they are all different styles. And we were like, yeah, DRX, there's no way. And then DRX, in these insanely long, rough, incredible series where they overperformed in the Worlds qualifiers, they made it here. And the most people were saying, okay, well, EDG is going to win. We all were kind of slightly leaning towards DRX, but we were like, it might be a 3-0 either way. And then they get the reverse sweep yesterday. So kind of after game one, we're like, okay, seems pretty likely they're not going to make it. Game two, a little bit closer, but still 2-0 start. Probably not going to make it. They reverse sweep. Now they've made it to the semifinals. And everyone is still saying, well, there's no chance. There's just no way. And I can't predict them to win. I just cannot do it. They are going to be outclassed in every lane. If you just list the 5 positions, you're like, okay, like weakest point for Gen.G, Doran bot, he's up against King, it's going to be fine. Then you're like, Pioshik against Peanut, okay. Zeka against Chovy, it's one strong point for DRX, but it's Chovy. You look at the bottom lane and you're like, Deft against MVP Ruler. So when your other strong points is like actually just you're fighting fire against a bigger fire. When you look at the positions across the board, you're like, well, this just doesn't seem like it's going to work. And that in itself, compared to Gen.G's masterclass performance we just spent the last 20-30 minutes talking about, compared to DRX winning through unforced errors and a lot of mistakes that happened in that series that they played against EDG yesterday, is very difficult to actually predict and say DRX is going to win. But I just have to say, like, we have said this so many times. We have been wrong about them so many times. I do think this is the toughest of the opponents they faced. You know, we talk about the EDG series, much easier opponent. Going all the way back to KT Sandbox, DAMWON Kia, these are opponents that were definitely easier than fighting Gen.G right now. So there's that caveat. But they did actually shut up the haters and actually make it happen so many times. And despite not predicting them, I think it would be one of the coolest and most hype upsets potentially in World's history if they actually are able to beat Gen.G and Deft goes to the finals and it's his last dance just keeps going. It would be absolutely insane.
I mean, the other thing, fucking rein it in. Because here's the thing, though. Technically, we have someone in the call who actually have someone who's lost a bunch of games to DRX. Yamato, how can they win?
Honestly, I think the biggest part of their challenge is that
I just want to follow on with Wolf's like player by player comparison is absolutely on point, but it's also the stylistic comparison, right? Like DRX is a very for the most part, we didn't see it as much versus EDG, but for the gauntlet and for most of Worlds, when they get leads, they're the boa constrictor that's just like their macro's good and they just like squeeze the life out of their opponent slowly, right? But the thing is that Gen.G's late game macro is also very good. Like that is one of their key features is decision making around when to go to objectives, how to approach objectives, what the right timing should be. Should we take this Drake? Like I said before, or should we just funnel gold and like try and take as much, get ourselves like a further ahead or back into this game if there's an early deficit. And they're just better at it than DRX is. Like, so it's really hard to see not only on an individual level, but purely on a teams and stylistic level, how they beat Gen.G. Like, it feels like there are almost no angles, right?
Yeah, I have to agree. I think they run into such a big challenge as well, is that they have shown so many games at this point. Like they've shown the Heimerdingers, they've shown their answers into Renata, and they've gone so deep already. While Gen.G in 2 of their games just played Yumi Misfortune. They played things that they've shown in the past, and they weren't pushed in that department because DAMWON were preparing in a way where they wanted to invite all of the things that they play, like the Sejuani, and they just wanted to counter it with these junglers that fight very well in the jungle early on, right? And I think this, in terms of the volume of preparation you can do to prepare against a team like DRX, I think that work is going to be very easy with how many games there are. Sure, Gen.G went to 5 games, but I just don't think it's quite the same. I believe DRX individually truly like overperformed in this series against EDG in terms of how well Zeka played in contrast to how Scout played. Like there was a clear like difference in player skill there on the day, and the only true hope is if that somehow plays itself out once again, that they are on such a high cloud in a way that their confidence is going to shine through in the first game, and Gen.G could face some kind of demons. I'm cooking up some mystery juice here, because in my mind still, if I look at the players pound for pound in terms of what they can potentially attack in Gen.G's playstyle, I feel like Gen.G, I don't think Kingen has played well enough to try to take over the map through top side and try to compete with what Gen.G is trying to accomplish on bottom side. I believe that DRX is going to try to find some funky matchups in the bot lane, and it's going to be an arms race about who tries to find more advantages through bot side and through mid. And I think this is Peanut's comfort game, and this is what they've been doing so well the entire year in the meta, where there was the Zeri and the Sivir and everything was bot centric. Peanut was the best at this in terms of finding those opportunities and knowing which camps to give up in order to be there to create bigger advantages. And I think Peanut will be in his element. He will not be, forced to think about every single move like a damn chess game, unless Pioshik decides to just lock in Nidalee like he did in the past and just try to fucking recreate what Canyon did. Maybe, I don't know. I just don't, I can't imagine it, even knowing how DRX scrimmed. I think that DRX's strengths they've showed so far is just not what you can compare to what Gen.G's strengths are. And I don't think get pushed in the same way as they did against DAMWON, because I think that stylistic matchup was just very awkward for them, and this one isn't.
Thinking forward to what we might be talking about next week on this show is how Gen.G's 3-0 over DRX was so easy and so simple. They showed way less, which will give them a pretty nice advantage going into the finals, because T1 versus JDG we expect to be much closer. A lot more strategies are going to have to be shown. That might go to game 5. There might be the struggling team has to show something they wanted to save for the finals opponent in Gen.G. So it's actually a really sick advantage for Gen.G. They played the hard one already, and they didn't show as much as DAMWON Kia did in that. So they get to kind of go into this essentially walkover match against DRX. That's what we're predicting. They get to show less. T1's going to be pushed to the brink, or JD's going to be pushed to the brink in that other side of the bracket. So this matchup against Gen.G, or rather against DRX, actually gives Gen.G a pretty big inherent advantage going to that finals, I think.
It's also, the scrim meta is going to develop as well. Like, I wonder if JDG is going to get any practice.
Yeah, who's going to scrim?
Like, are the
play DRX? Enjoy.
Yeah, are the Korean teams going to be willing to practice against JDG this week? Is a real fucking question, right? And it's probably not going to be Gen.G that wants to scrim against them. I would imagine that T1 and Gen.G are just going to spend all their time scrimming with each other.
And DAMWON is gone. As far as I know, they're going to be gone. So they're not going to be there. You're not going to be playing.
Riot sends you home instantly when you're out of the tournament. It's like, oh, this is next best flight. And you can't create a McDonald's team in North America. I just don't think it would bang the same as in Europe, with Wunder and Leader and Mickey and so forth. I don't know what kind of team you can cook up.
Last year.
You can maybe a little Bwipo, a little KoJJ. I don't know what the rest of the roster will be to McDonald's it up for JDG.
No, because I was going to say the same thing, Monty. Logically, if you know how Koreans are, right, T1 doesn't have a choice not to practice Gen.G. If they get the opportunity, they have to do it to try and beat JDG. So logically, if you're Gen.G, you actually now can just control the whole scrim fucking universe by saying to T1, you're only going to practice us. Agree? Yes. And then you just go to DRX, obviously you're not fucking playing you. And then you go, you know what, JDG? Oh, I'm busy that day, actually. I have one of those media things that Yamato said he had. No, I think the schedule's clear. No, I definitely do. I'm sure I remember. Sorry. I'll tell you what, if I get some time, I'll see. But I hear DRX is available, though. You can practice with them. And brilliant. Yeah, so I'm playing against them. I have to fucking play Gen.G in a real match. So I think this is where Korea, listen, if people don't know, I know these aren't sister teams anymore, but when push comes to shove, they may as well be when it's against China, for fuck's sake. So without going geopolitical, I feel like there's a way they can sort of close the ranks on that one. That's why for China, the real sad thing for them is it would have been better for JDG if EDG had gone through. They at least would have one proper team to practice.
Yeah, I think, well, I don't know if I think EDG is more of a proper team than DRX, but I think the problem too is that Scrimming against DRX really doesn't prepare you to play T1 like
No.
at all. It's actually fucking useless. Like they are just completely different teams. Like they're not going to pick the same, even like remotely the same champions. Like you don't have to deal with the potential like Zeus like MVP stomp performance. You know, it's just Kingen is just not going to
the
be
random
that guy.
Faker Galio or
Yeah,
the other stuff that you're gonna encounter, the Camille Galio comps. I actually just think the meta is not going to change very much actually between these semis and the finals, or even the quarters and then the semis, because most of these teams are going home now, and it's really just going to be about watching your own footage and actually trying to improve your own play rather than trying to come up with pocket picks that you know the coach may or may not prepare. But I think a lot of these pocket picks for teams like T1 and Gen.G already exist, and they've already been shown, and they're very good at them, and it's very difficult to prepare for that. But I don't think we're going to see something, as my personal take, I don't think we're going to see something wild and crazy like the King pick.
Yeah, no, DAMWON advance. That's where we might have
Yeah,
seen like continuously weird stuff.
Not something they scrimmed between quarters and semis. Something that they already had prepared, and something they've already known about for quite some time. I don't think we're going to see much of a change in scrims, or scrims will not lead to a change of the meta that we've seen in quarters into semis and finals. I think we're going to be seeing mostly the same stuff. That's what I expect.
I would say that if anything, there are certain champions that have been permabanned throughout the tournament, and then the question is if Gen.G want to run back like a Singed into the Yumi, or if people are going to invite maybe a Caitlyn, because these are champions that have been permabanned the whole World Championship. So you have to begin to ask yourself how much practice have people gotten on these champs, and you can kind of put yourself in a position where you create an edge. Maybe against DRX, you figure out the champion that's really good into Heimerdinger. Maybe all of a sudden, I'm just talking out of my ass. I was thinking Karma Soraka naturally, but maybe all of a sudden you have Lehens playing fucking Syndra, throwing his turrets on his forehead, outranging him. Maybe it's something cocktail like that, you know? Maybe there's something there that can be cooked up in what everyone has shown so far and their patterns. We saw the Kindred into the Graves. Maybe there's something else hidden there. I can't really think of anything. Like Kindred was the usual pick in the Graves at the World Championship, I believe. When DAMWON won Worlds, this was like the go-to pick into it, but maybe this is the angle, right? It's like everyone's been banning Kate every single game. Maybe there's an opportunity to set something up for success, or maybe this is where DRX, as the weaker perceived team, can begin to create some chaos. Because something that I saw in their draft against EDG, on the red side, they left Yumi banned till last. And I believe in a world where EDG didn't ban Kate, I don't think they would actually ban Yumi. I think they would want to play the Kate into the Yumi. In my mind, if I try to think of why they banned Yumi on 3, maybe they wanted to see if EDG is going to ban it themselves. But at the same time, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me because EDG did in fact play Yumi into us, right? So all in all, I'm curious to see how that develops because there's been certain champs that have been permabanned, and maybe there's room to explore there. For example, Aatrox was something that was perma-banned, but now we saw it left open a lot more, and people were very happy to get Sejuani, Azir, and let's say Jax as a trade-off for the Aatrox. Maybe there's room to develop that more, because maybe you get Aatrox Azir for the trade of Yumi, and then you have like some fucking singed garbage prepared for it. Maybe that's the case, right? That's the only kind of way I would see where you could potentially find, some awkwardness in the position, because I can't imagine that the teams got any additional Yumi practice beyond the very early weeks in the tournament.
Removing Zeri from Worlds was actually like the best choice that Riot could have made, by the way, just looking back at it retrospectively, because it makes the bot lane so much more interesting, and there's so much more you could do, and there's so much more complexity. So glad. Like, I was thinking about, like, what if Zeri comes back? Nah, not gonna happen, and I'm so glad for it. When you were talking about Lehens' Singed, I was like, no, it's just not gonna happen. So glad that's gone for now, at least.
Honestly,
Right.
we were a big Zeri team, and we were trying to make it work. we were desperately trying
Gen.G
to make
too
it
is the
work.
same thing, you know.
By the way, being as obviously we've only got you here for this episode, Yamato. Who do you have winning Worlds? Who would you be your pick at this point?
I feel like the top side of the bracket is going to win. I think they will go all the way, either JDG or T1. I think JDG, because I'm predicting them to beat T1. I think they will win. I feel like Gen.G really was the best team in the previous meta. It was so revolved around how good your fucking AD carry is going to perform, and that's fucking ideal when you have the fucking name tag ruler. But now I feel like there is a lot more pressure on your top laner and what he is going to be forced to do within the game. And in terms of what Doran can do in the context of the other top sides that are on the other side of the tournament, I think that is where it might become a little bit more dangerous. But then the main question for me still with JDG is how well does their bot lane perform? Because still, Korea and Gumiushi have a lot of fucking depth. Gen.G as well, they have a fucking ocean of their own. So it's just a question of how well can JDG perform in that circumstance. I just believe right now mid lane, jungle, top in the current meta is just a little bit more important to me in terms of how the game goes. And I think that what you do with bottom is picking those champions that are really going to become a nuisance later on in the game in terms of the draft, like the Zaya and the Renata that we saw into the full melee comp that RNG drafted.
Who are you guys taking?
We got a couple more things. So first off, I want to revisit the conversation of, is this the best Worlds meta ever? Which my answer is still yes, especially after seeing these quarterfinals, because we get to see so many different kinds of champions within the bot lane. And the top lane as well as the jungle. It feels like we have so many different styles that are viable between these teams right now. Like, you're able to play split pushing compositions, you're able to play pick compositions, you're able to play 5v5, like kind of like front to back team fighting compositions. And it's not like rock paper scissors either. It's like there's very cool timing windows or cool plays that all of these different teams are making. And the most boring lane is maybe mid, but also the mid champions are very interesting and fun to watch. Like they're high skill, like really impactful, and Akali, Sylas, and Sylas changes obviously depending on the composition, so he's always interesting to watch. Azir, Victor might be a little bit boring, but for the most part, like, it just feels like this meta is just incredible.
Well, it is exciting that you can have a boring control mage as well, like that.
Yeah.
That is so different. It's odd that the boring one is interesting because it's so different from the other mid laners. I think that's really fun too.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement. I think you have the same mid lane champs over and over again, like with Azir, Victor, Sylas, Akali, and LeBlanc. But all of these champs change the whole fabric of what you want to achieve, both as the opposition and also being on the same team as these champs. And that completely invites everything else within the game. And when Atrox is left open, you see so many interesting things with the Jax and the Camille. And then after some bans start to land, when Atrox is out, the opportunity for you to look for something to blind pick also becomes very challenging. But in that challenge, you see different solutions. Some people go for the Graga, some people go for the Renekton, and some have the balls to blind pick Yone. And in that challenge, the fact that every team comes up with a different solution is very nice. I really like the meta. And with those champions being so unique in top and mid, invites bot lane to find the champs that counter that stylistic sense of how mid jungle top wants to play, and because it changes between the games. That's why we see so many different champs. And as a fan of League of Legends, I fucking love this. I'm really happy about the Worlds meta.
All right, we have one last thing to do, Yamato. We have to give out this Big Dick Energy trophy.
Is it literally a dick with a wig?
It's an aubergine.
It's an eggplant.
It's metaphorically a dick.
All right. All right.
So the purpose of this, Yamato, is we have to give this to a player who had the biggest dick energy play of the last week. So
Single play.
Yeah, like biggest dick energy moment or game. I mean, we can decide what the criteria is, but then I'm gonna ship it to the player. So, I mean, I think like it could be Pioshik on that Soul Steal, which was complete fucking insanity, and could have just thrown the entire series away right there for not that much gain. It could be Zeka on the Sylas, perhaps. Maybe it was Korea on those crazy engages on Tom Kench. I don't know. Did you have a?
Yes, on the Jace.
Oh yeah,
Showmaker.
Sure.
I mean, he didn't win, but he
The Showmaker game just on the Swain could win it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So I'm like, I don't know. It's a tough call.
You don't have a Blue Balls award to send to Deft for this fucking Nexus thing? I'm thinking, generally speaking, like the first two names that come to mind, but not with a specific player in mind, is Zeka and Canyon, but Canyon didn't qualify, so it feels less so. Zeka solo killing him over and over again. I think that's a bigger story than just one sentence. You're looking for
That's
a one
fine.
sentence
That
banger,
story
right?
is legit though.
I feel like it with the one sentence, like if there was like one moment that really like sent some blood to my penis, then there would be the moment where Swain pulled 3 people because
Okay.
that game was monstrous from Showmaker. If I had to pick one moment only, it has to be this Swain game because it was a thing of beauty.
Yeah,
I
that's
think that's
for
pretty
me.
good.
Like the one game of Zeka on Akali versus Scout as well, where he solo killed him, and he was just chasing him and hunting him down. And then the Showmaker game stands out for me. One play probably goes to Pioshik, but it's a really tough call because we had such an incredible quarterfinals, which is very rare to have this many good games and this many good plays all at once. It is pretty funny that they're all Korean players that we're talking about here, and unfortunately none of the Chinese players are getting any of the lock on this one. But
We can give away 2 as well. Like,
No, but here's the thing. I know what Wolf means. Like, the problem with JDG is they won as a team, didn't they? Like, the only angle I could go with is, like, to be fair, 369 could just play anything in that Rogue series and look like he was in the fucking lane bully. I know.
There's still more time, for 369
Yeah, exactly.
next week. You could dominate Zeus and have some, but like I agree. The Showmaker, to me, I think it comes down to the Zeka 1v1s and the Showmaker Swain game, which were both like incredibly like dominant, big dick energy performances. So we could give away 2.
if we do 2, I mean, I think it's them, right? Showmaker and Zeka.
Have to add one more contestant.
Go on.
Okay.
Go on.
Canyon in game 1, like the way they did Herald, I've never seen anything like it.
That
Like
was
he
insane.
just leashes Herald with 150 HP, and like this was a psychopath move because it could have gone wrong in so many ways, but somehow they pieced it together. And I was watching with Dominate. We're like, this guy is fucking mental. This is fucking, it worked. So God bless him. But this was so fucking nuts. Every fucking thing that he did in terms of fucking queuing over the walls and just hiding on the wolves, hoping not to be spotted because he would just fucking die if he got spotted or lose flash. And then he just fucking played through the game. Of course, he lost, so maybe not in the same category, but the Herald, the first 8 minutes of the game was mind blowing.
All right.
Yeah,
So
here's the thing. I think I'm voting for the Showmaker Swain game because the problem is, even though I'll give it up to Zeka, he played amazing at World so far, I don't believe it's legit. He's on some sort of PED. He's on Viagra or something. Difference is, Showmaker has always had the huge slong. He's that's the thing. When you've actually got it, you don't always have to show it off all the time. He can just whip it out anytime he likes, as he did there.
Honestly, yeah, thinking about it more, like, remember the stuff we were talking about earlier about the comp that Showmaker was playing Swain into with the Nami ult and everything else.
That's true.
And the Maokai, etc., and the Poppy. maybe that's the one. It'd be a great way to give Showmaker, hey, you got Gen.G in the first round, but you played this amazing game. He played an amazing series too, to be fair. And that Swain game is really the most standout performance, I think, for an entire game that we've seen so far from anyone. So I think that's my final vote, to give it to Showmaker.
All right.
It was
Well,
that time that Razork got completely in T1's ass, but that was ages ago now. Forget about that. That was weeks ago at this point in time.
Well, Wolf, if you agree with that, then you actually have just volunteered yourself to carry one of these back to Korea with you and then ship it to him. So you didn't know that was what you were volunteering for?
Hey, it was going to be a Korean player no matter what. So
the thing is, if we pick Zeka, I can send it to his hotel this week, right? And I can get it to him here. But Showmaker will have already departed. But yeah, we'll give this one this week to Showmaker because that seems like the common consensus here. And we'll be giving out more of these, of course, as Worlds goes on. So very, very fun that we have these. All right, thanks a lot for joining us, Yamato. We're gonna do some viewer questions. So have a lovely evening. It's been wonderful talking to you about the games. And we'll come back. Answer some viewer questions after this break, guys.
All right.
Right, we're back for viewer questions. Thanks to Yamato, obviously. If you don't know, it's not Twitch chat viewer questions. In fact, if you're someone who watches the VOD, you can submit a question for the next episode. What you do is you go to our Discord, which is obviously now called Last Free Nation. You go in there, check out the GROGcoin lounge. There'll be a pinned tweet. It tells you how to basically buy the GROGcoin, which is a type of cryptocurrency based on the Rally network. And if you own 25 of them, you can ask a question. Well, as long as the show still exists forevermore, just in any future time, just hodl the 25 and you can keep asking questions till the end of all time.
Yep, I only have about 30 minutes to do this today, so we may not get to all of them, but we'll do our best. First up, I remember trying to get tickets for that MSI in Tallahassee you mentioned, but they were quickly sold out. Do you have theories on how a sold-out event ended up with a half-full arena? I mean, I was just there. It wasn't full. Scalpers would be my guess, potentially. I don't know.
I mean, people sometimes don't show up to these things, so...
Yeah. Favorite fillings to put inside a wrap? Well, the best wraps are burritos. So burrito filling. Rice, beans, meat, cheese. That's my jam.
Yeah, that's pretty much the same answer for me.
Probably shawarma.
Also a great
didn't
one.
expect that one.
Yeah,
I also like Durham, the style.
Yeah, I also like chicken Caesar salad wraps. So like chicken and grilled chicken, romaine lettuce, some Caesar dressing. Always nice.
I have to remember, Monty's American, so they think that a salad is where you get a load of chicken and meat, pour loads of mayonnaise all over it, like put sugar in, then you go, oh, there's a bit of lettuce in there somewhere. I'm being healthy. Go on.
Monty and Thorin, following on from the trend seen in traditional sports, which esports organizations do you feel is primed for a sports washing acquisition?
I mean, the thing is,
Astralis?
in theory, the one that already did this previously was obviously like LGD did it because they were like simultaneously, like PSG took the sponsorship of LGD, which is like a Chinese org buys into like a French org or whatever it is. PSG's from like somewhere in France, Paris, sorry. And then obviously they had sponsorship with like Gazprom, which was actually the Russian engine. So they just combined like the nexus of some like fucking axis of evil level shit. Like, this is how we'll fight. So I would say, here's the thing. I don't know about Astralis because, to be fair, they probably will sell soon. So on that level, maybe they could get bought out. But I would expect
company, so like they could actually just be like forcibly taken over.
No,
right?
exactly. So I do think there is a world where some massive org will sell. I mean, put it this way: if it obviously it'd have to be an interesting angle because geopolitically now I don't think it can happen. But I would have said the other angle would have been like Navi or something like that. But I think geopolitically, China probably isn't on the top of their fucking friends list right now. So maybe not for that one. I don't know about American ones because I feel like in America they can just get the money elsewhere for now. It's probably a European org, I would guess.
I don't know. I think some of the American orgs are going to be in pretty
TSM.
shape.
I mean, the joke is at this point for TSM, like, I don't know what you're washing at this point in time. If anything, it's like if you're some dictator, you're like, our rep got worse since we bought TSM. How's that possible? Like,
in Korea, a lot of the teams are tied in with, like, their sponsors are tied in with their sports teams as well. So there's not really much incentive to be like, for KT to be like, now our team is the sports team. It already kind of is tied into that. So
no, they mean more the angle of like what sports washing, as in you make like the one company seem cooler by sponsoring it with some like evil shit, but because it's a cool company anyway, the cool part goes onto the evil company and makes them not seem as bad.
Yeah,
it's not really a concept in American sports, unfortunately.
Yeah, not in Korea though. I don't think. I'm just letting everyone know it's probably not going to happen in the LCK anytime soon.
There's a joke about how Canada might not always win hockey in the Olympics, but if every country fielded their second best, they would win them all. Okay, that's a cool argument. So basically, if every team was forced to field their second best team, then Canada would win. If each major region fielded their fifth best team, which region would dominate? Well, Korea's fielding their sixth best team right now. It's a joke we make about DRX.
Yeah, I mean, consider that it could have been, like, fifth best team would have been Sandbox, I think, actually got fifth place in the end. It might have been KT. One of those three teams, right? You've got DRX, KT, Rolster, and Live Sandbox, and all three of those teams seem to be better than any other team outside of whoever got fifth in LPL.
Yeah, so
which I don't remember off the top of my head exactly.
Victory 5, I would guess. It would pretty good. Rookie.
It's probably LPL would be the answer. But the more interesting question, I think, is if they could only field native players, it's probably Korea. Like the fifth best team, if you took all of the Koreans out of LPL and put them onto all Korean rosters, it would probably be Korea. Just because, I mean, there are just so many like banger, like S tier Korean players that are competing in LPL right now. That if you remove those from the LPL pool, I don't think they would have the same depth in terms of their quality teams that they do right now.
Here's what needs to be said, though, just for the sake of the old rivalry. Europe would destroy LCS. Are you even fucking kidding me? That'd still be a good team from LEC. I can't even process what the LCS, their 5-man lineup of all native players would be. Mate, that would be like an Academy League game.
Yeah, that would be real bad. It would be real bad. But we're probably going to find out what that looks like next year, Thorin, after all the teams will be fielding native players.
Just see who Golden Guardians fields next year.
Yeah, they really care about native players. Not that they're cheap, but they really care about the development of them all of a sudden. Professional disciplines of all team sports / esports result in the recruitment of the best players from lower leagues, which results in a lot of big unreasonable egos on each team. Hence, it is really difficult to cultivate weak side players, as some refuse or cannot change their playstyle to fit that role. So if Monty or Thorin were GMs of a team, would you try to recruit specifically for a weak side top bot or a carry jungler, or just try to look for the best player? And if you were trying to mold such a player, how would you go about doing so? Okay, I think so. Like basically, when you're trying to bring up players, you're going to get like the flashier hype, like star players, rather than necessarily taking a player who might be a great weak side player and mold them into a professional weak side player, I guess is the argument here.
To me, that's more like a fan question. I think it's fans that can only look at the explosive player who just pops off. I think actually loads of coaches understand like a guy who just plays a safe mid lane mage, a guy who plays the Maokai, the Gnar top lane. And also, I'll throw this in there. Yeah, exactly. I think that some people have done it their whole careers. I think Rogue have done it continuously with different rosters over and over and over and over. Like, here's the problem I have with this premise is if you actually look at the people who are like the really good weak side players in the West, they're also really fucking good players who just happen to have made that like their fucking job to do. Like Odoamne and Impact, they could go to like a worse team and be the star player and just play carry all day long. So the problem with that is, the flaw is this: if you're playing weak side in like the ERL in Europe, you probably aren't ever going to be like a world-class player if you come to the LEC. Whereas the difference is, I probably would take a carry player. You could just learn to be a weak side player in the LEC if his team played through amazingly through bot or something. So I think that's, I know what the fan means, but I don't like, essentially, I think it's more like the great players at weak side choose to do it. The ones who just have no choice, like, I just don't think they'll ever be world-class players, if you know what I mean.
I also think that one of the things that Peter Dunn does so well is that he wants players to develop into carry players, but he basically starts them at weak side positions, because you don't want to have a rookie player that you're investing so many resources in that's going to make a terrible like macro mistake in the mid game and then throw the entire game and die with all the resources and give shutdowns and blah, 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 right? So what he did, as you look at Danny, is basically he started playing Danny in his first year as more of a weak side bot laner, and then transitioned resources into him once they put Jojo on the team, and Jojo became kind of weak side mid laner, right? So I think there are ways that you can introduce players that you want to develop as weak side players, and that creative GMs and coaches do that.
Yeah, I think you're looking for a player who's both incredibly mechanically skilled, but also someone who shows a lot of flexibility. That's usually the type of player that is the dream for anyone to coach. And usually they're younger. So they're not as flashy or as famous, because if they are, then you already know what their playstyle is. You want a malleable player, a player who can actually play multiple roles, has a wide champion pool. And then as time goes on and as you develop the player, you really hone in on what their strengths are over the course of a year or 2 years. That's how top teams do it. Not, a lot of teams just go, that's the guy, I saw him, he's good on solo queue, I'm going to get him, he's the prospect. We've seen teams do that in the LCK where they get someone like Birdall who looks to be a superstar in solo queue, but actually as they develop him, they realize like he hasn't actually hit the peak just yet as some of the other players he's competing with, like Nuguri, for example, he's now competing with on DAMWON. So I think getting a player who shows a lot of raw talent is the best way to go. Not someone who's proven himself necessarily, or someone who's flashy, but someone who actually you think you can mold him into something better than what he appears to be.
It is a great question for you, Wolf. Isn't Ghost simply the better fit for DAMWON than deokdam? Despite his flaws and mediocrity when compared to the elite ADCs, Ghost's selfless and facilitative style perfectly matched DAMWON's aggressive topside, and he often managed to neutralize his opponents with barely any resources, freeing up Beryl to roam. wouldn't you agree that Ghost on picks like Seraphine are more effective than deokdam's Lucian that falters when not played around?
I think that premise was true before the durability patch because Ghost was a very safe laner in a time where it was very difficult to actually survive bottom side, and it was not about getting carry picks funneled as it is now. So in 2021, I would have agreed that I'd rather have Ghost on the team like DAMWON, where they're playing around mid jungle and Canyon and Showmaker are trying to play more around top side than bottom. But in 2022's meta, with the durability patch coming through, I think Ghost doesn't actually get to express that safe skill. He actually needs to be playing more aggressively and be more dominant and actually be a more carry focused and 2v2 focused player who's actually making big plays in the lane. I think deokdam is insanely good at laning. I think deokdam's Aphelios in particular is one of those ones where you give it to him and he's going to be able to get tons of plates. He might get plates in bottom and top when they lane swap because he has such an advantage. And with Ghost, you just really didn't get that. And trying to funnel resources into a later game carry, AD carry like the Aphelios versus something like Ghost's Jhin or Ghost's Senna, which he is very good at, just isn't as strong right now. So I think the premise is actually correct in a different era, but I think that today I prefer deokdam.
It's also that Ghost, we're assuming that Ghost the question assumes that Ghost is like a good, like weak side player. I mean, he's not Prey, right? Like Prey was like the ultimate weak side ADC, and Ghost was simply like, he was just bad by the end. Like
He fell off. Big
yeah,
time.
like, he wasn't even good at doing the things you want him to do.
Yeah.
So I think the real question is like, was it smart to bring in deokdam and Kellen as opposed to keeping Beryl? Would be the question.
I think Ghost is not done. Like, I think he will bounce back. I think Ghost was, again, hurt by durability, was also playing on Nongshim when Nongshim had an insane amount of COVID problems throughout 2022, and didn't ever really have the team around him that Nongshim was supposed to be. Like, this is supposed to be a super team that has effort with him down there, where they can play around roaming support while he stays under turret. But durability patch came through, his team had COVID, BDD super underperformed this year, and Kana also super underperformed this year. So Nongshim just kind of took a hit, and I think Ghost is a casualty of that. And yes, I do agree he underperformed, but I think a lot of that was mental. If you look at how he reacted in interviews and stuff like that. So I think Ghost will come back to light, but it's not a good meta for him, and we just have to wait and see.
Here's a good question for you, Thorin. Are there any generational differences in players across esports with long lifespans? Like a different generation of players.
What does he mean, generational difference? Oh, he means like as in each following generation, what's different? Like, are there any big changes?
Because you see like generations of players like every 2 or 3 years.
Basically, I would say the general trend would be at the beginning of most games, there's a reason why it's always like Boxer, Diamond Procs, fucking, let me think, it would be like Get Right in Counter-Strike. Basically, it's players where they just innovate an entire style of play, or like creativity and the spontaneity is their main strength because no one's figured the game out. People have, especially Koreans, if people don't know, this is the whole reason why Grr was actually really good in Korea and could never have continued on, because he wasn't a guy who liked to practice loads. He was like one of those like speed chess players who's like, oh, brilliant, I've got the game out the way now, like cool. He didn't want to sit and study like openings 15 hours a day. So what he'll even tell you is like, once Koreans just started the grind of like, you play 14 hours a day and you practice every build. If you know the way Koreans practice in StarCraft, they would just practice the same build over and over to shave like half a second off, just like a jungler will with the clear. And that's why like when you watch them and then you watch like a Western player like Meteos play on his POV, and he's like casually moving the screen with the mouse and like, oh, I think I go to Wolves now. And like you'll never beat that guy when the game's refined and they've put in the million hours, 10,000 hours, etc. So I would say the big difference is you start off and it's usually like being a genius, especially intuitive players, I think, have the big edge early on. I think as you go later in the game, a lot of people underestimate this aspect. I actually think being able to refine the game is brilliant in its own way. Like if you're a player like Innovation, these sorts of players, and you can just master all the fundamentals and get everything so it's like perfect mechanically, that is fucking amazing to watch as well. So I would say the longer the game goes on, I would say it becomes more about like refining elements of the game, with exceptions, of course.
Some of the stuff that comes with that as the game gets more popular is you have more tools to refine the elements, like team houses, and the infrastructure is there to have proper coaches
and analysts.
Exactly. So yeah, it's so true that as a game grows, like the support system grows with it.
This is a great question. If you could go back in time and be a fly on the wall for any team meeting in any BO series, which would you go to and why? It's
I'll
actually
tell
an
you a
interesting
fun one off the top of my head, obviously, which is I'd love to go after the first game in the 2016 semis where Rox played against SKT and
was
just
my
be in the
answer, too.
SKT dressing room after that first MF like fucking
Yeah,
support game.
support
Like,
game.
what the mate? I bet Coma was just like fucking tearing shit off, like smashing stuff through windows. Like, what would you even be doing then? Like, you weren't even going to draw up at that
That was
point
my
in
answer
time.
as well.
That would be the best one, surely.
It's a really tough question for me. There's so many series I'd love to be in.
I also think, just for historic reasons, being in the T1 room as well, after in the famous summer finals, which was that ended with the Ryu Faker Zed 1v1, after game 2, when KT Bullets or KTB is up 2-0, and the adjustments they made to reverse sweep that would have been a very interesting time to be in a team room.
I would love to see the Pro League, the StarCraft 2 Pro League 2014 finals. The final game that KT Rolster won with was TY, who was a Terran player at the time, Bunker Rushing Classic, who went for a Nexus first build, which is extremely greedy. Just knowing whether that was the plan from all along, because each matchup was predetermined, knowing if that was a plan for all along, or if they were like, okay, they're losing this. Classic's a good macro player. He's going to try to drag this out and try to bring the series back and get into T1's heads or rather get into KT's heads a little bit. And they were just like, you know what? Like, if we win this, we win. So just bunker rush him and like, hopefully he goes Nexus first and we get a build order when to go. I'd love to know if that was the plan from the beginning or if they actually changed the plan as the series went on.
By the way, technically, since they're called Nexus in League of Legends, everyone's just Protoss, which does make sense because they're either broken as fuck or just absolute trash units.
Hey, the
There's
Nexus
no in
is
between.
first every game too. The Nexus
There you
first.
go. Exactly. They're all just cheese players.
As your NFL fans, if you guys could be players, which position would you play and why? And whose game would you try to emulate?
Here's the problem, Monty. I
leave
had a
this to you
similar
guys.
question like this a while ago on Side Select where they were saying, like, what sportsman do you want to be? And I just said, well, I'm ruling out anyone from the UFC or like fucking NFL because who wants to get the shit kicked out of them even if you're really good? So the problem with this topic is, look, I'm not in it to get like brain damage. So I would just have to be something mad, like, I don't know, fucking. And here's the problem I've noticed with the NFL, Monty. This is that's not a bad one, but this is the metaphor for life. I actually think the metaphor for life goes like this. You would think, right, the guys who tackle all the time would get injured. They injure other people. So actually, logically, I think being like a free safety would actually be the best one, Monty, because most of the time, you're not getting like mega tackled. You're just fucking a guy up blindsided and smashing his head in. Like, the joke is you have to hurt other people so you don't get hurt. So I'd just do that role.
So, okay, excluding injuries, if you could just do it, like if you could not,
fun.
if you were never going to get injured and not get the brain damage and what have you, regardless, you just got lucky, let's say, right? What would you
Problem
play?
is, for pure fun, I think it's got to be being like the number one wide receiver option because you just like imagine the tension the whole time as you just run along the sideline. I'd just be the whole time. I'd be saying quotes like Jim Carrey, like I could dance all day. I'd be the most annoying motherfucker of all time, mate. I'd love it. Taunting them all. Oh, I'd love it.
I would probably, because I really like defense, and so I would probably play linebacker just because you can basically QB the defense from that position, and like some of the most like legendary defensive shot callers play either linebacker or safety. And like that's the guy who could really like you're in a position where you can see the field and like make adjustments, and you can also choose to play the ball, right, and play the routes, and you're trying to get a read on the QB's eyes, or you can be basically an edge rusher and blitz at the same time. So there's a lot of agency in the linebacker position as to whether you're going to drop back in coverage, try and stop the run, try and sack the QB. Plus, sacking the QB is like really exciting. So that sounds fun.
You have one, Wolf. What would you pick?
I mean, I think I'm kind of with you on being the wide receiver. It feels like such a fun position to play on, just being able to, if you can run fast enough and you can catch well enough, you could spot where the ball is coming in. Everyone's got eyes on you, and you're the guy that everybody is screaming and cheering for when you catch it and get the first down or get the touchdown. So
you're also probably not going to be sandwiched like a tight end running across the middle.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, no, I don't know. I think that would be the most fun position to play that has a lot of impact. So I think that's probably where I'd go.
When to take art seriously, or what breaks your suspension of disbelief? Since it's fiction, anything happen doesn't have to be realistic or follow logically. Yeah, like, so I'm actually pretty good at suspending my disbelief. I will say in art, the thing that triggers me most and causes me to fall out of suspension of disbelief is fucking musicals, okay? So I like opera a lot, and I like regular theater a lot. But when it goes from talking to singing and talking to singing and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth again, it is very difficult for me to take it seriously because it just jars me so much out of that suspension of disbelief by changing the medium. It's actually why I didn't watch Hamilton for a long time, because people told me it was a fucking musical when it was actually an opera. There is no dialogue, guys. It's all done in song, which made it much easier for me to suspend my disbelief and like enjoy parts of it, right? The musicals like mega trigger me.
So the examples they give is the Dark Knight, like not pushing the button, or Jack spoilers. Like why didn't Jack survive Titanic because they're on the wood piece together?
Yeah.
I think these types of things, I actually personally get frustrated when people tell me they don't like. They're like, oh, that ruined the movie for me because Jackie didn't survive and he could have just held the wood longer. I always think when I hear these things, well, you didn't pay attention to the whole movie. Like the whole fucking point of the movie is tragedy and like it's a love story that goes wrong and she's remembering all these things and having all these memories. This is on the Titanic example. And this is like a plot device basically for the end of the tragedy. And like whether he could or couldn't hold on to the wood is actually like the least important thing in the entirety of the art form that we're looking at here. And these small things like, well, he wouldn't have been able to dodge that, or he wouldn't have been able to run this fast, or whatever. Like, he wouldn't have survived that fall off the waterfall. These things to me, like, if I'm already sold on the premise of the movie, like, it's a fucking movie. Like, this is not actually real life. Like, if you're nitpicking these things, and I think you're missing the art form, you probably just aren't enjoying the movie at all. What pushes me over the suspension of disbelief is usually characters doing things that are not realistic for their characters.
Yes.
Doing things that don't make sense for their characters. That's when I get out. That's when I'm like, Nope. Doesn't matter if it's realistic, whether you could do it as a human or not. Like, if he actually, would he have survived that? Would he have died there? Whatever. That's not important. Would a character have done this thing when they've shown the opposite the entire time you're watching this film or the show?
Or Deus Ex Machinas. That's the other one that like triggers the fuck out of me.
I'm with Wolf, though. I do think, like, look, I used to do it myself. We all did when we were a certain age. But, like, being the reply guy, like, well, actually, we could have just stayed on the edge of that piece of wood and there was space for them both to survive. Like, you have missed the whole point. Like, it wasn't about that, was it? Like, as Wolf says, it's just a fucking plot device to end the movie in the way it should end, right? It's a shit movie if he survives at the end, isn't it? Like, spoiler, none of the women are crying. They don't watch that movie every sleepover. It's just remembered as a movie like, oh, shame all the other people we didn't care about died. So, like, if that's the biggest problem you have with that movie, not where the whole ship was like that the whole way and all, like, give me a break, where people, that guy was running around with a gun when it was all sick, you know what I mean? Like, there was bigger problems, but yeah, don't get lost in that. That's like that analogy where it's like someone's pointing at the moon, like, beautiful moon tonight, and you're not only not looking at the moon, you're going, nah, the fingernail's really dirty, actually. Like, you've missed the whole point. Look at the moon, you idiot. So I would just say this, it's a controversial one, but it's why I think modern movies suck. Anytime everything on screen is just computer graphics, my brain just goes, well, they can just do anything with that. Who cares what's going on now? Like, I thought stuff like Avatar was shit. I actually genuinely had no emotional connection with the movie ever, because it's just terrible. Especially because since I grew up with video games where they were first inventing 3D graphics, everyone who's an old school gamer knows this. Nobody watches the cutscenes unless it's like Metal Gear Solid, mate. The cutscenes is shit. It's like, back in the day, E3 in the 2000s, where they started just ripping you off and showing you like an amazing cutscene, pretending it was the game, and you were like, oh wait, that's just the cutscene. The game will never be like that. Like, I find when it's all just graphics, it becomes really bad. Like, I actually prefer it where you're really, really scarce with when you have to use computer graphics. If you just use it to replace everything, it just makes the movie a bunch of nothing to me. You may as well be an animated movie then. That could at least get into it,
I love when game cutscenes are actually done with the in-game engine, and it's actually just the
like
character
Deus Ex.
using the engine.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like Deus Ex, yeah.
Yes, that was the shit. Exactly. Even if it's more cheesy, even if it's like the mouth moving, it's fine. But don't worry about it. Exactly. Go on.
On a scale from 1 to Ghost Pepper Enema, how painful has it been to watch Broncos games this year? Less painful than last year. This may surprise you, Because here's the thing. The only reason you've seen all the Broncos games is because they are on prime time now because of the Russell Wilson trade. They were equally shit last year. At least there's hope this year, guys. Like, I don't think Russell Wilson's going to suck forever. Like, I don't think that's a thing. He's injured, new coach, new offense, new ownership. Like, they're going to figure it out on a long enough timeline. He's too good to just, I mean, he didn't just, like, suddenly become terrible. Like, he's going to be pretty good again at some point in time. Just a matter of getting there. And honestly, any Broncos fan will tell you that this is way better than the fucking carousel of quarterbacks that have happened since Peyton Manning.
Oh,
like,
mate, you would get so triggered if you
shit.
read any of the online comments. You would get so triggered, Monty, because here's the real take Broncos fans have. I wish Drew Lock was here. It's like, you don't know football. Just
you idiot.
Shut the fuck up and get out. Just get out. Like, as Monty says, right now is about the worst it could ever be with Russell Wilson.
Yes.
And there's a chance it just gets really good if they fix some pieces. Like, spoiler, he wasn't an MVP candidate all those seasons because he was a system player. He wasn't. He was fucking mega in the Seahawks. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So, like, anyone who's like, bring back Drew Lock is like, you don't deserve football, mate. You should be like a fucking Bears fan or something. Just fuck off.
Suck for the next several years, then eventually, like after 3 or 4 years, they're going to get some really sick picks, and then Arch Manning is going to be graduating from college, and they'll just pick him first. Whatever, it's fine. Look, it couldn't have gotten worse, guys, and like this is basically the worst case scenario, so it can only get better from here, basically. On a scale of 1 to 10, how badly would LoL esports history be ruined if the truths about match fixing came to light? Not that badly, actually. Maybe like a 3 or 4.
So there's things I want to say so badly now, but
no, you can't. Don't do it.
It's not the time, is it? It's not the time. So it's all good.
It wouldn't affect LoL history that badly, and they also happened a long time ago.
There have been a lot. Yeah, there have been a lot of esports that have been hit by this harder.
Yeah,
and some that would have been hit harder. But anyway,
it was much worse than StarCraft in terms of that. Commissioner's opinion on F1's latest rules drama, please. Red Bull's Max Verstappen narrowly won the championship in 2021, and it's now been revealed that Red Bull violated the budget cap that year. How would you punish rules violations? This is last year, right, when it came down to the last race between Hamilton and Verstappen, and it was all very hype. How would you punish rules violation like this that can only come to light after the championship is decided? Find the team, take the championship, Barry Bonds style asterisk. I mean, since they didn't catch it at the time, I think it just has to be an asterisk at this point. You can't, and like maybe you basically could, put sanctions on them for future seasons, but I don't think you can take the championship away.
I'm not a F1 person. I've watched it very casually every now and then, but I don't understand it very well. So I'll put that asterisk out before I say this. But I think if you are able to win a championship with your team violating a budget cap, and then it doesn't, and no one finds out about it until after the championship, it means the rule is probably very difficult to enforce. And so, it's one of those things where, like, if you can actually violate a budget cap, get away with it, win a championship, then people find out later, how can you retroactively enforce this? You can't. You're not even able to enforce this in real time. So it means the rule needs to be looked at.
Well, it's similar to how the Houston Astros won that World Series by cheating, basically, right? Like, I think you just have to sanction them in the future and put them at a competitive disadvantage moving forward, would be my reaction. You have any thoughts on this, Thorin?
I don't give a flying fuck. I mean, I will say the problem is when you say like that guy did there, like you can't just take the championship, but then you actually incentivize cheating. And a sport I follow does incentivize cheating. In the UFC, if you hold on to the fence when someone's taking you down, you are supposed to literally be docked a point, which if you know how boxing, the must score system is enormous. But because it's enormous, Monty, and people do it all the time, they very rarely ever take the point away. They just warn you. And there has literally been fights. You can go back and look this up. There's a Chad Mendes versus Jose Aldo fight where he 100% was going to get taken down. He doesn't get taken down because Jose Aldo holds on the fence, and then Jose Aldo just knocks him out like 1 second later. So that in that scenario, I don't care. Like, the problem with these sports, if you notice, is it would ruin the sport if you redid the final or you said, whoa, the winner doesn't win. So fans would hate it. But as a purist, I hate the idea that you can essentially, you're incentivized to cheat and see if you get away with it. So I do think it ruins the integrity of the sport. I don't know specifically Formula One, but like, I'm a different type of dude. You have to realize, way before that coaching bug ever happened, Monty, in CSGO, I once said, if it ever turned out like half the pro scene cheated, I am the guy who'd go, then burn it to the ground and we'll start again. Like, I'm the only one who would do that. Everyone else would go, right, we've got to get together and have like an amnesty behind closed doors. Look, you've all learned your lesson. Don't, like, I would be just fucking like the Punisher or something, just coming with a flamethrower, like, Just burn the whole thing down. Start over, mate. Start over. So go on.
I think we all had it's fun, actually. I think we all had very different takes on that. I got one more question for you. Unfortunately, we can't get to everything today, guys. One last question will be, in retrospective, have the 10 years of pushing back versus Riot helped, or did it just wear everyone out with little to show for? I think it has helped, especially behind the scenes. Like, obviously, caster pay got increased significantly. Pushing back on them does have a tangible effect. Not as much as we would have hoped, obviously, and it is very tiring because the public doesn't really recognize how, the victories that have been won. I think that's the most annoying thing, is that the public, if more fans were cheering on the victories that were being won, it would increase pressure on Riot to continue to respond.
Let me give you an example from a different game. So in CSGO, me and Richard had that show by the numbers. Obviously now me and Semler do it on Last Free Nation. And when we did this show, it played a similar role to me and Monty on Summoning Insight. We could directly address industry figures. And spoiler, literally, every fan might not watch this show. All the execs in CSGO used to watch that show to find out what we're going to say next. Loads of people at Riot will always be aware what we criticize them for. So we do know we do have a channel through to these people. And here's the example I would give. When they did a major in London, the Face It Major in 2018, I heard behind the scenes, you can imagine from who, that they weren't going to hire a bunch of talent, and one of them was Sponge, who at the time was one of the best analysts in the world, and they were only going to use him for the group stage and then not even bring him back for playoffs. And for playoffs, they were going to go with a mad nepotistic lineup that would have ruined the whole event. So because we went out of our way to basically imply and say this on the show, they secretly behind the scenes saw that it was really bad community sentiment, and they were like, quick, fucking fix it. And they hired Sponge, and he came back and he did the playoffs. Now, if you're a fan, you could go like this, as people did. You made a big stink about nothing, and they were going to hire him anyway. It's like, no, you bozo. We actually had to do it publicly to force their hand, because the only way they could get a win and make us look bad was to do what we asked them to do. And I think Riot has done that so many times. There was even one when I was at On Gamers where we revealed that mad shit where they'd written it into the LCS contracts early on that you wouldn't be allowed to stream any game except League of Legends if you were an LCS player. And because we published that at On Gamers, that immediately got pushed back and it was killed immediately. But here's how Riot did it, and this is a precedent they have set forever. They came out and claimed we heard that you guys in the community don't like this move, which is good, because believe it or not, just before you guys said you don't like it, we actually decided that wasn't the right move, and that was just an internal preliminary potential thing. And what they did is they saved face by lying and just did what they should have done anyway. So I actually think ultimately you'll never know, unfortunately, if you're just a fan, but we have had loads of impact on some of the things they've changed for the better. I would say the more exhausting thing is built within this question. It's that an idiot will absolutely turn around and go, see, why were you making such a big deal about it? You bloody idiot. That was the whole mechanism. Spoiler, if we could have talked them behind the scenes, we would have. They weren't listening.
Yeah, I mean, we tried. I've tried many times to be reasonable, and unfortunately, the last resort is always to fight these battles publicly. It's not the way I prefer to do things, guys, and it's not the way I ever operate at first. I mean, another example is obviously when Riot tried to. I mean, basically, one of the reasons why ESL had to create the ESL 1 brand was because they needed to have a separate tournament for Dota, because Riot said, you can't have Dota at IEM or we're not going to give you the license to do League of Legends, right? And now that's a moot point, because guess what? They took it away from ESL anyway, which was obviously eventually going to happen. They got played in the long run, but I don't think ESL 1 would exist if Riot didn't do that.
Funny detail. No one will know this, but in doing so, Riot actually allowed me to work for ESL again. Because everyone knows that infamous Unfiltered episode, Wolf, where I basically just went off on fucking Poland. And I wasn't famous enough at the time for everyone to go, that's just Thorin. They were like, who the fuck's this guy who's coming here tomorrow? So that wrecked me, right? But what people don't know is the way I got back into working for ESL is because IEM was the brand that Carmack ran. And when they made ESL 1 its own brand, it was like they had different execs on both. And so the ESL 1 people came to me like, look, I don't know what the beef for you and Carmack and the IEM was, but we're ESL 1, so don't worry, we can bring you on. It's our company too. So the joke is Riot inadvertently brought me back into the game. And I'll tell you what, if they could go back in time now, maybe just let IEM have Dota, might have been better for your careers. I'm just saying.
I came into working for Riot very late in League of Legends history, obviously, and I think a lot of the stuff that people have fought for over the years has allowed me to work with Riot in a more positive way than people who were there before me had, and I'm very appreciative of it. And I think that the question is very strange to me because it's basically saying like if you push it into not just like you guys and those who did stand up to Riot and Blizzard and other companies in the past, if you extend it beyond that, it's like basically is like fighting against things you is fighting against things you don't believe in and things you think are wrong. Was that good or were you just tired? And I think like at the end result, like improvements have been made and improvements will continue to be made, and I think everyone should always stand up to things they don't believe in, whether it's public figures or fans. And I think huge impacts have been made, and I think casters in League of Legends and League of Legends tournament circuits, etc., have all been improved by not just personalities pushing back, but the community pushing back. And I think it's important. I think people should continue to fight for what they want. I think one of the big things that people are talking about right now is double elimination at Worlds, and like maybe we will, get that because people are continuing to push about it. So these are things that happen in history, in outside of League of Legends, in politics and in oppressive regimes and stuff. Like it's never really like, oh, I'm worn out and I'm tired of it. Usually, that means that nothing changed and you gave up. So don't give up.
I think also part of the issue is that Riot's own behavior has been to be extremely petty and vengeful against people. And again, I think that it was always possible to have a good relationship with Riot if they would behave like adults and have professional conversations about these things and not react super emotionally and like rain vengeance down on people. I don't think that they themselves have behaved very well when it comes to dealing with people outside the company. Whereas I had a very different relationship with Blizzard, where when I was critical, I could go to Blizzard and have an adult conversation, and we would figure out a way to solve the issues, or like they would learn something. I'd listen to them, I'd get their perspective. But when basically, if you say something against Riot, they will just not talk to you. And it's like a high school clique, right? And they'll just not talk to you and just talk mad shit behind your back, and try and take it out on you as however they can. So it's a difference of professionalism, and I hope Riot continues to get better and that people can have respectful, critical relationships with them in the future, where they actually listen and give information in response that might change people's minds.
That's how it is for me in Korea.
Yeah, great.
So we're more professional, Monty. We talk mad shit to their faces.
Yeah, exactly. They know how we feel. All right, guys. That's it. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions this week, but we had to start a little late today, and also we went very long because there's so many like interesting things to talk about. We will be back with more Big Dick Energy trophies next week as we discuss some of these semifinals. So see you then.